Yo, welcome to Bald VOLD. Got an absolute banger for you today. What if Tony Stark adopted Harry from the Dursleys and built him a magic-powered iron suit at age 11? Like, subscribe, comment below. Let's go. Chapter 1. The cupboard and the billionaire. The drive from London to Surrey took 40 minutes when Tony wasn't driving. When Tony was driving, it took 23. And Pepper had stopped arguing about it somewhere around the M3, because arguing with Tony while he was behind the wheel required attention she preferred to spend on not dying. "You said a quick stop," she said, holding the door handle with the quiet desperation of someone who had made peace with their mortality. "It is a quick stop. Tony, we have a meeting with the Ministry of Defense which we will make." He checked the mirror, changed 2 lanes simultaneously, and took the exit ramp at a speed that made a passing lorry driver honk in what was probably outrage. "Relax. I am relaxed. You're white-knuckling the handle. I'm resting my hand. Pepper. Drive." The thing was, the detour hadn't been planned. Nothing about this particular Tuesday had been planned, which was itself unusual because Pepper planned everything, including Tony's deviations from the plan. And she had not planned for Tony to look out the car window at a residential street in Little Winging and say "stop the car" in a voice she'd only heard him use twice before. Once when he'd spotted what turned out to be a critical structural flaw in a prototype. Once when he'd seen a news report about a Stark Industries arms deal he hadn't authorized. That voice meant he'd seen something that wouldn't let him go. She'd stopped the car. Now they were parked on Privet Drive, and Tony was standing on the pavement outside number 4 with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the house with the kind of focused stillness that usually preceded him taking something apart. The house was perfectly ordinary. That was what bothered him, he thought. He'd seen ordinary used as camouflage before. The lawn was aggressively maintained. Window boxes full of petunias. A car in the drive that was washed too often. Everything on this street was performing the concept of normal so hard it had pulled something. He'd seen the kid through the car window. Just a glimpse, a small shape moving along the side of the house carrying what looked like a bag of gardening tools twice his size, wearing clothes that might have fit a man. The clothes alone weren't what had stopped Tony's heart. It was the way the kid moved. Shoulders pulled in, head down. The particular economy of motion that came from years of learning to take up as little space as possible. Tony had grown up rich and theoretically loved, and he still recognized that posture. He'd worn a version of it himself until he was old enough to start wearing armor instead. He knocked on the door. A large man answered, large in the way that suggested he'd been muscular once and had made a series of dietary decisions since then. He had a thick neck and small eyes and the expression of someone who had opened the door expecting the postman and received something considerably more inconvenient. "Vernon Dursley," Tony said. The man's eyes moved to Tony's face, then to the car at the curb, then back. Whatever he'd been about to say shifted into something more cautious. "Yes, Tony Stark." He didn't offer his hand. "I'm doing a weapons systems audit for the Modi part of that audit. Involves cross-referencing civilian contractor addresses in the Surrey area." None of this was true. Tony had invented it in the 4 seconds between the door opening and his mouth moving, which was a personal best. "Your name came up. Can I come in?" Vernon Dursley's small eyes got smaller. "I'm not a contractor." Tony tilted his head. "That's strange. Can I come in anyway?" He came in anyway. The inside of the house matched the outside, performatively normal, relentlessly clean, arranged with the precision of people who needed their environment controlled because other things weren't. A woman appeared from the kitchen, tall and thin with a neck like an anxious bird, and went still when she saw Tony. A large blonde boy was visible through the lounge doorway, horizontal on the sofa with a video game controller. "Lovely house," Tony said, meaning none of it, looking at everything. "Nice family. How many kids?" "One," the woman, Petunia, he'd remember later, said quickly. Too quickly. "Right," Tony said. He heard something behind him, turned, and found the source of the bag-carrying, space-conserving silhouette he'd seen outside. The kid had come in through the back and was standing at the kitchen doorway, freezing the moment he registered Tony's presence. Up close, it was worse. He was small for what Tony guessed was 10 or 11, wearing a gray, oversized t-shirt and trousers held up with what appeared to be actual rope as a belt. He had dark hair that looked like it had never been introduced to a barber and round glasses held together at the bridge with Scotch tape. There was a healing bruise along his jaw that had gone greenish-yellow at the edges, which meant it was at least a week old, which meant it had not been his last. The kid's eyes, very green, very sharp, very old, moved from Tony to the Dursleys and back. "Hey," Tony said. "Hi," the kid said carefully, in the voice of someone calibrating every syllable for threat level. "What's your name?" "Harry," Petunia said, overlapping with the kid saying it himself. Both of them saying it made it strange, like a claim being staked. "Harry's our nephew. He lives with us." Tony looked at the nephew. The nephew looked at Tony. Tony had spent a lot of years reading rooms and people and the spaces between what people said and what was actually true, and what he read in this particular room in about 8 seconds was enough to make his jaw clench so hard he felt it in his back teeth. "Right," he said again, very pleasantly. "Harry, great. Do you go to school, Harry?" "Yes, sir." "Good grades." Something flickered behind the taped glasses. "They're okay." "He's not very academic," Vernon said from behind Tony, with the confidence of a man who told this particular lie so many times he believed it. Tony didn't look at Vernon. He kept his eyes on Harry, who had gone very still in the way that prey animals went still, and he watched the kid's face do something complicated, a brief storm of expression, quickly suppressed. Anger. Resignation. A practiced blankness that settled over everything else like a shutter coming down. That blankness made Tony's chest hurt. "Uh-huh," he said. He reached into his jacket pocket, produced a business card, and held it out to Harry. The kid took it with genuine bewilderment, turned it over in his hands, read it. His eyebrows climbed. "I'm going to need to borrow Harry for a few minutes. Official business." "Now, see here," Vernon started. "Audit purposes," Tony said pleasantly. "Shouldn't take long." He took Harry outside. They sat on the low garden wall at the edge of the property, which put Tony at a somewhat more manageable height difference, and Harry held the business card in both hands and said, "Are you actually Tony Stark? In the flesh? From the news? With the—" Harry made a vague gesture with one hand that was clearly trying to approximate a repulsor blast. "The very same." Harry looked at the card, then at Tony, then at the card again. He was doing the calculation, Tony could see it, trying to figure out the angle what was about to be asked of him. Kids who grew up the way this kid had grown up learned early that adult attention was transactional, that kindness preceded a requirement, that warmth was a precondition for debt. The math was running behind his eyes. "There's no audit," Harry said. It wasn't a question. "Sharp," Tony said. "Number I saw you from the car." Silence. Harry looked at the middle distance. "How long have you lived here?" Tony asked. Always since when?" "Since I was 1. Harry paused. "My parents died." "I know." He didn't yet, but the bruise on the kid's jaw and the rope belt and the practiced invisibility were telling him enough of the shape of things. "Do you know what a welfare check is?" Harry glanced at him sideways. "Is that what this is?" "It's becoming that, yeah." "I'm fine," Harry said, with the absolute conviction of someone who had never been fine and had no reference point by which to judge it. Tony looked at him for a long moment. Harry looked back, and there was something in that look, not defiance exactly, but a kind of watchful readiness, a preparedness to be dismissed, a practiced expectation of not being believed. It was the look of someone who had told the truth before and been punished for it. "The bruise on your jaw," Tony said. Harry's expression didn't change. "Walked into a door." "Harry." The kid was quiet. "I have a very good legal team," Tony said. "Best in the world, actually. I also have a private investigator on retainer, 2 child welfare attorneys, and a particular set of personal feelings about adults who think it's okay to hurt kids." He kept his voice level, conversational, like they were discussing the weather. "I'm not going to push you right now, but I'm going to give you my direct number, separate from the card, and I'm going to come back." Harry was staring at him. Why? The question was so plainly genuine, so stripped of artifice, that it landed harder than Tony expected. Why? As if the premise that someone might come back for him required explanation. Because someone should have a long time ago, Tony said. And that's not your fault. Something broke open in Harry's face for just a second, something young and raw and undefended, and then the shutter came down again. But Tony had seen it, and he filed it away, and he did not let his own expression do anything except stay steady. He wrote his personal number on the back of another card, handed it over, and stood up. "I'll be back on Friday," he said. "Tell the Dursleys it's a follow-up audit." Harry looked at the card. "You don't have to. I'm aware." "What if," Harry started again. "What if they say I can't talk to you?" Tony smiled. It was not a particularly warm smile. It was the smile he wore in boardrooms when someone told him number, then I'll be very interested in why a family with nothing to hide would say that. He went back inside, said something pleasant and entirely meaningless to Vernon Dursley, and rejoined Pepper in the car. She looked at his face. She didn't say anything, which meant she understood it was serious. Pepper Potts could read Tony Stark's face better than anyone alive, and what she saw in it now made her close her tablet and wait. "Get me everything on a Harry Potter," Tony said, starting the engine. "Ward of Vernon and Petunia Dursley, 4 Privet Drive, Little Winging. I want school records, medical records, GP history, whatever there is. Tony, and call Richards." He pulled out, at a normal speed this time. "I want to know what the legal pathway looks like for emergency guardianship of a British national minor." Pepper said nothing for 2 full seconds. Then, "The Modi meeting, reschedule it." She rescheduled it. The records were thin. That was the first strange thing. A kid of Harry's age should have had GP visits, dental checkups, school nurse reports, a paper trail of small, ordinary medical incidents, scraped knees and ear infections, and the routine documentation of a child moving through the world. Harry's records had almost none of it. The school reports that existed were interesting in their own right. Marks that swung violently between poor and exceptional with no apparent pattern, teacher comments that alternated between struggles to apply himself, and demonstrates unusual aptitude in ways that suggested different teachers were describing different children. Social services had visited once, 4 years prior, following an anonymous report. The case had been closed after a single visit. No follow-up. The medical records showed an emergency visit when Harry was 7. Broken rib. Fell downstairs was the notation, with no further investigation. The attending physician had flagged it for follow-up. There was no follow-up in the file. Tony read it all in his hotel suite at 11 at night with a glass of scotch he didn't drink and Friday running quietly on the laptop beside him. He read it all twice. Then he closed the file and sat with it for a while. "Want me to book the flight back to New York?" Friday asked. "Number, okay. Run me family law precedents for emergency guardianship, non-biological UK minors, evidence of abuse. Cross-reference with international cases where US nationals were granted interim custody pending formal proceedings." "That's a narrow search." "I know. Run it anyway." She ran it. He read those too. Friday came. He went back. This time he didn't invent an audit. He pulled up to number 4 in a car that was considerably less subtle than the one he'd been driving on Tuesday, because subtlety had not historically been one of Tony Stark's primary tools, and he was done pretending otherwise. The car was long and black, and expensive enough that he watched the curtain twitch in the front window the moment it stopped. Vernon answered the door with a different energy this time, prepared, Tony noticed. Rehearsed. He'd looked Tony up between Tuesday and Friday, which Tony had expected, and the knowledge had clearly produced a cocktail of greed and wariness that was sitting uneasily in the man's expression. "Mr. Stark," he said, with an unconvincing attempt at warmth. "We weren't expecting. I said Friday." Tony stepped inside. Harry was already in the hallway, which told him the kid had been waiting. Their eyes met, and Tony gave a small nod, and something in Harry's shoulders lowered about 3 millimeters. "I'd like to speak to Harry privately," Tony said, "and I'd like to see his room." Vernon's eyes flickered. "His room is Where is it? A beat. Upstairs. Second door on the… Harry, Tony said, show me. Harry showed him. The second door on the right was a small bedroom, recently, very recently, from the smell of fresh paint and the new mattress smell, upgraded from what Tony suspected had been considerably less. There was a camp bed, a small dresser, a shelf with textbooks. It was clearly staged. Tony stood in the doorway and looked at it for a moment, and then he walked back into the hallway and opened the door to the cupboard under the stairs. Inside, a rolled-up sleeping bag. A small shelf with a child's drawings pinned to the underside of the stairs. Shoe size, dust grooves in the shape of a small person's daily impression. A hook near the door with nothing on it. He stood there for a moment. Then he closed the cupboard and went downstairs. What followed was not a pleasant conversation. Tony didn't raise his voice once. He sat at the Dursleys' kitchen table with the particular calm of a man who had all the information he needed and had already decided what was going to happen, and he explained it the way he'd explain a technical problem, clearly, thoroughly, without anger, which was somehow worse than if he'd been angry. He explained what he had found. He explained what he was going to do. He explained the alternative, which involved a more formal set of legal processes, more people, more attention, more scrutiny of the kind that tended to stick around. Petunia cried. Vernon's face went purple, then white, then settled into a kind of spent resignation. Harry sat at the end of the table and watched it all happen with eyes that gave nothing away. By the end of the afternoon, Tony had signed a temporary guardianship agreement, called Pepper to get the formal paperwork started, and told Harry to pack whatever he wanted to bring. Harry had returned from upstairs in under 4 minutes with a bag that wasn't very full. He'd stood in the hallway holding it and not looked back at the cupboard door or the kitchen or the garden he'd spent years maintaining for people who treated him like a chore. At the door, Petunia said, He's not normal, you know." She said it in a clipped, almost warning tone, like it was something he should be told, something that changed the calculation. Tony looked at her. "I know. You don't know what I mean." "I know exactly what you mean," Tony said, "and it's not a problem." He and Harry walked to the car. Tony opened the passenger door, Harry climbed in with his not very full bag on his lap, and Tony got in and drove. About 2 minutes passed in silence. Then Harry said, "Where are we going?" "Hotel tonight. Tomorrow I've got meetings, which means you'll have access to room service and whatever's on the television, which I'm told is extensive. We fly back to New York on Sunday." Harry absorbed this. "New York," he said very carefully, as if it was a word in a language he'd heard of but never spoken. "You have a passport, right?" Tony glanced over. Harry's expression answered that question. "Okay, we're getting you a passport." Harry stopped. "I've never been anywhere." "I know," Tony pulled onto the motorway. "That's going to change pretty dramatically." Another silence. Then, quietly, "Why are you doing this?" Tony had prepared a version of an answer to this. He had a version that was about duty, and one that was about logistics, and one that was vaguely about altruism. All of them were true, and none of them were complete, and in the moment he opened his mouth, what came out was, "Because you deserved better than that, and I can give it to you, so I'm going to." Harry was quiet for a very long time after that. At some point on the motorway, with the evening making the sky orange over the embankments, Tony noticed in his peripheral vision that Harry was looking at him, the way people occasionally looked at a proof they hadn't expected to hold up, with the careful, slightly stunned expression of someone revising their model of what was possible. He didn't say anything about it. He turned the radio on low, and they drove. The next few months were, Tony would say later, the most educational period of his adult life, and he had built functioning weapons systems at 17 and a miniaturized arc reactor in a cave. Parenting, it turned out, was a different kind of engineering problem. Not harder, exactly, harder in different ways, which Tony appreciated as a concept even when it was ruining his sleep schedule. The first few weeks in New York were mostly about Harry discovering that the world contained things he hadn't known existed, and Tony watching this happen with the combined experience of a man who had everything and had long since stopped noticing it. Harry, who had apparently spent a significant portion of his childhood going hungry, approached Stark Tower's kitchen with the systematic focus of a person conducting due diligence. He ate everything he was offered, and sometimes things he wasn't offered, and then looked guilty, and Tony had to explain approximately 4 times in the first week that there was no scenario in which Harry would be punished for eating food that was in the kitchen. The 5th time he explained it was the last. After that, Harry stopped looking guilty and started eating like a person who believed he was allowed to. That was week 2, and it felt like a victory. He enrolled Harry in a private school, the kind with small classes and good resources, expensive in the way that had stopped meaning anything to Tony about 15 years ago. Harry's first week of school was interesting. The school sent a note home saying Harry had corrected his maths teacher twice and had been observed staying after class to finish an extra problem set of his own invention. Tony pinned the note to the fridge with a Stark Industries magnet. "You corrected the teacher," he said over dinner. Harry, who had now been living in Tony's life long enough to lose some of the defensive watchfulness, shrugged. "She wrote the formula wrong." "What did she say?" "She said I was right." A pause. "Then she gave me a detention for interrupting." Tony raised his glass. "First of many. Wear it like a badge." Harry grinned. It was a good grin, wide, slightly crooked, surprised by itself. Tony had noticed that Harry's smiles still carried a half-second delay, like his face was checking with some internal authority before committing. The delay was getting shorter. Friday noted Harry's initial physical health data during the first medical checkup. Slightly below average height for his age, signs of historical nutritional deficiency, the healed rib fracture from 4 years prior, 3 other healed injuries of the type that shouldn't accumulate in children who didn't play contact sports. Tony read the full report in his workshop at midnight, stood up, walked to the window, looked at the New York skyline for a while, and then went back to work because there was nothing useful he could do with what he was feeling except channel it into something constructive. What he built, in the weeks after that, was a bedroom. Not a room with a bed in it. Harry had that already, and he'd furnished it over, lavishly in the first excited week and then toned it down when Harry seemed more overwhelmed than pleased. But a bedroom, the kind that was built for a specific person. He pulled Harry in one Saturday and said, "What do you actually want in here?" And Harry had stared at him. "Whatever." "No," Tony said. "Not whatever is fine, not whatever is okay. What do you want?" Harry chewed his lip. Then slowly, like he was confessing to something, "Books, a lot of books, and space to take things apart. I take things apart sometimes. I know that's—" "What kind of things?" "Old radios, small appliances Dudley had." He stopped. "I found things sometimes." "Did you put them back together?" A longer pause. "Mostly." Tony looked at him very steadily. "Did you put them back together better?" Harry met his eyes. "Sometimes." What Tony did not say in that moment, but felt with a clarity that was slightly alarming. "Oh, number, oh no, you're going to be insufferable." What he said instead was, "Come downstairs." He brought Harry into the workshop for the first time. He'd kept it off limits until then, less because he thought Harry would break anything and more because the workshop was his, and he was protective of it, and bringing someone into it was a particular kind of gesture he'd been thinking about for a while. He gave Harry the basic tour, not patronizing, not simplified, just honest, and watched Harry's eyes move around the space with the focused, hungry attention of someone encountering a language they already half spoke. "You can come in here," Tony said. "With me, to start. Rules: don't touch anything live, don't run anything without asking, don't touch Mark VII under any circumstances." "Why not Mark VII?" "Because Mark VII and I have a complicated history and it's mine." He handed Harry a pair of safety glasses. "Everything else in that corner is fair game." Tony, who had never taught anyone anything willingly, found that he was, and this was the part he had the most difficulty processing, enjoying it. Harry asked the right questions. Not just smart questions. The right ones, the ones that jumped to the interesting problems, that poked at the assumptions underneath the obvious answers. He had no formal engineering training and an intuition that was, frankly, embarrassing for most adults Tony had met. By the third Saturday in the workshop, Harry had diagnosed and fixed a calibration fault in one of Tony's secondary sensor arrays. Unprompted, he'd walked past the readout, stopped, frowned at it for about 30 seconds, said, "Is that frequency supposed to flutter like that?" And when Tony looked, it wasn't. Tony fixed the calibration issue and went back to what he'd been doing. But he sat with the fact of it, the intuition, the pattern recognition, the very specific quality of attention that Harry brought to problems, and something started to take shape at the back of his mind. Something to do with the Hogwarts letter. He'd known it was coming. Not through any magical foreknowledge, but because Friday had found a reference, buried in one of the stranger corners of cross-referenced UK public records, to a private boarding school in Scotland with an acceptance process unlike any he'd seen. No applications, no fees on record, no conventional address. The kind of school that existed, institutionally, in a state of deliberate obscurity that required considerable organizational effort to maintain. He'd filed it and waited. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in July, delivered not by post, but through the kitchen window by an owl that had apparently decided that glass was a suggestion. The owl landed on the kitchen counter with tremendous dignity, extended its leg, and fixed Harry with an expectant stare. Harry, to his credit, said "huh" very calmly, removed the letter, and gave the owl a piece of toast, which it ate, and then departed through the same window with equal dignity. Tony watched this from the kitchen doorway with his coffee. "You seem unsurprised." "I've had owls before," Harry said. "At the Dursleys, weird things happen around me sometimes." He said it carefully in the testing tone he still used sometimes for things he expected Tony to react badly to. He turned the envelope over. His name was on it. Mr. H. Potter, The Tower, Manhattan. No postcode, no country. "I didn't know it followed me here." "Open it." Harry opened it. He read it. He turned it over, read the second sheet, then put it on the counter. "It's a school," he said. Tony put his coffee down and picked up the letter. He read it twice. The first read was for content. "Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Pleased to inform, September 1st, enclosed list of required materials." The second read was slower, and by the end of it he was sitting on the kitchen counter with the particular expression he wore when something interesting had just intersected with something previously unconnected. "Magic school," he said. "I think that's what the weird things mean," Harry said. "I didn't want to." He stopped. "At the Dursleys, Aunt Petunia said it was abnormal. She said my mum had it too, and it was." "Don't." Tony looked up from the letter. "Don't finish that sentence." Harry stopped. "Your mum," Tony said quietly, "sounds like she was remarkable." Harry looked at him with that stopped expression he got sometimes, the one that meant he'd prepared for a reaction and received a different one and needed a moment to recalibrate. He nodded once very slightly. Tony looked at the letter again. "Headmaster, Albus Dumbledore, Order of Merlin, First Class, Grand Sorc. CHF, Warlock, Supreme Mugwump, International Conft, of Wizards." He spent a moment with that. Then he said, "Friday." "Yeah, boss." "Add research project to the queue. Magic, not theoretical, empirical. I want detection equipment, energy signature analysis, the works." He set the letter down. "Also, get me everything publicly available on a school called Hogwarts, a Dumbledore, Albus, and the phrase wizarding world. That's going to be an interesting search, isn't it?" He looked at Harry. "You want to go?" Harry blinked. Then, "Is that, I assumed." "Harry," Tony waited. "Do you want to go?" A pause that was different from the defensive pauses, shorter, less careful. Then Harry looked at the letter, and then at Tony, and the honesty in his face when he said yes was the kind that didn't get practiced. It just was. "Okay," Tony said. "Then we're going." He slid off the counter and picked up his coffee. "But not without prep work, because this," he tapped the letter, "is a medieval castle in Scotland with no address and an owl postal service, and you are not walking into that with a wand and a hope." Harry was smiling, fully smiling without the delay. "You're going to build something." "I'm going to build something," Tony confirmed. He paused in the kitchen doorway, looking back at the letter still on the counter, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry in its archaic curling script, and felt the gears of something lock into alignment in the back of his mind with the specific, clear, slightly terrifying click of a problem that was about to become a project. He was already making a list. Chapter 2. The Wizard and the Engineer. The owl came back the next morning with a second letter. This one wasn't from Hogwarts. It was on different parchment, heavier, cream-colored, with a seal that Friday identified as containing trace amounts of an organic compound she couldn't classify. The letter inside introduced itself as correspondence from the office of the Deputy Head of Magical Creatures and Muggle Relations, Ministry of Magic, and it was written in the kind of bureaucratic language that Tony recognized across every culture and institution as meaning. "We know you exist, and we would like to manage that." The letter was addressed to Mr. Anthony Stark, Muggle guardian of Mr. H. Potter. "Muggle," Harry said, reading over Tony's shoulder. "Non-magical people, apparently," Tony said. He was already on his second read. "They're aware of you. They're very carefully not saying they've been aware of you this whole time, but the phrasing here," he tapped a paragraph, "is doing a lot of diplomatic work to avoid that implication." "That means they left me there on purpose," Harry said. His voice was even. That was the thing about Harry that Tony had come to understand in the months since Privet Drive. He processed things quietly, internally, and then said them plainly without much decoration. It wasn't numbness. It was precision. He felt everything, he just refused to be imprecise about it. "That's what it means," Tony said. "Or someone did, and the ministry either agreed or looked the other way." He set the letter down on the breakfast bar. "This is Dumbledore's signature in the CC line at the bottom. Notice he didn't write to us directly." Harry looked. He was quiet for a moment. "He runs the school I'm going to." "He does." "And let's not have conclusions yet," Tony said, in the mild tone he used when he had already reached a conclusion but wanted to maintain the appearance of process. "Let's get more data. We're going to Diagon Alley." Harry looked up. "What's that?" "Shopping district. Magical. London, apparently, in a location that doesn't officially exist." Tony drained his coffee. "Get dressed. And take the letter, they signed it, so if anyone at the ministry decides to be interesting today, we can be interesting back." Getting to Diagon Alley required going to London, which Tony accomplished by private jet in the time it took Harry to eat breakfast, and then navigating to a pub called the Leaky Cauldron, which Friday had found through a chain of cross-referenced property records that made no geographical sense. The pub appeared, from the outside, to be a perfectly unremarkable building on Charing Cross Road that Tony had walked past during previous London trips and never consciously registered, which he suspected was the point. Inside, it smelled of wood smoke and something herbal and old in a way that wasn't unpleasant. The clientele were varied, was the word. Tony spotted at least 3 people wearing robes in the middle of a July morning with no apparent awareness that this was unusual. A woman with violet hair who changed to blue as he watched, and a man in the corner whose drink was stirring itself. Harry walked in behind him and stopped. His head turned slowly, taking it all in. His eyes were doing the thing Tony associated with him encountering a new engineering problem, wide, mobile cataloging. "Okay," Harry said softly. "Yep," Tony agreed. The barman was a short man with a broad face who introduced himself as Tom, looked at Harry, went very still, and said, "Bless my soul, it's Harry Potter," in the voice of someone encountering a religious experience in their pub on a Tuesday. This appeared to set off a chain reaction, because within 30 seconds Harry had been noticed by approximately 2/3 of the pub, all of whom were looking at him with an intensity that made Tony step slightly forward. "Easy," Tony said, not to Harry but to the room in general. "He's 11. Several people had the grace to look abashed. Most of them continued staring. Tom led them through the back of the pub to a small courtyard and showed them the wall, a specific brick, tapped in a specific pattern. Harry watched carefully, then tapped the sequence himself. The wall opened with a grinding, impossible slide of stone, and the alley spread out beyond it, long, cobbled, crooked, packed with shops that advertised things Tony had no existing category for. He stood in the entrance with his hands in his pockets and looked at it. Something was running in his head already, a quiet, persistent humming that he recognized as the start of a problem getting interesting. He'd worn the same internal expression in Malibu before the first Iron Man build, in a cave before the Mark I, in the workshop in the hour before he cracked arc reactor miniaturization. Magic. The electromagnetic signature of this place was wrong, not broken, not disturbed, just wrong in the way that a new frequency was wrong before you understood what it was transmitting. Friday had flagged it immediately through the sensors built into his watch, which he'd repurposed into a field scanner 6 days after the Hogwarts letter arrived. "Scanning," he murmured, turning his head slightly. "Yes," Friday said through his earpiece, barely audible. "Ambient energy readings are, I don't have a category for this, boss. It's not electromagnetic. It's not gravitational. It interacts with our sensors like it wants to, but on its own terms. Note it, all of it." They moved into the alley. Harry's first stop, directed by the list that had come with the Hogwarts letter, was Gringotts Bank, which occupied a building at the far end of Diagon Alley that was white and gleaming and architecturally aggressive, in the way of institutions that wanted you to know that your money was safe, because they were dangerous. Goblins, Tony processed, filing this away alongside everything else, because apparently that was a real thing. The tellers were goblins, small, sharp-eyed, with the demeanor of people who had decided centuries ago that efficiency and contempt were not mutually exclusive. Harry produced his key, a small golden one from the envelope of Hogwarts materials, and said he wanted to access his vault. Tony came with him, because at no point in this or any other scenario was he letting an 11-year-old navigate a banking institution alone. The cart that took them to Harry's vault moved through underground tunnels at a speed Tony found genuinely impressive, which meant it was very fast indeed. Harry gripped the side rail with one hand and laughed, an unguarded, startled, delighted laugh, and Tony looked at his profile and thought, there it is. There's the kid who should have existed all along. The vault was not small. It was, in fact, considerably less small than Tony had expected given that Harry had arrived in his life owning 3 sets of clothes and a bag with a broken zip. The coins inside were stacked in quantities that, when Tony mentally converted against current gold prices, made his expression change. "Did you know this was here?" he asked. "No," Harry said, looking at it with his head tilted. "Your family's money." "I didn't know I had a family that had money." Tony made a note. Then he made another note when he spotted, in a corner of the vault, a sealed document box with a Gringotts seal on it and Potter Estate, sealed by order of A.P.W.B. Dumbledore, 1981 stamped on the front in official-looking ink. He photographed it with the watch scanner. The goblin guide noticed him doing it and said nothing, which was, Tony thought, the professional courtesy of one person with leverage recognizing another. He said to the goblin, conversationally, "Is a guardianship seal applied by a third party without the vault holder's consent, especially a minor vault holder, a standard procedure here?" The goblin's expression shifted by about 2 millimeters. "It is not standard procedure, sir, number, and if someone wanted to contest such a seal, one would require documentation proving legal guardianship and a formal petition through the Gringotts legal office, filed in duplicate." "Wonderful," Tony said warmly. "Let's do that." Harry looked between Tony and the goblin. "What does that mean?" "It means," Tony said, "that someone put a lock on information about your family's estate that they had no legal right to put there, and we're going to find out what's in that box." The formal petition took 40 minutes and a phone call to Pepper. In that time, Harry withdrew spending money for his school supplies from the main vault, which he did with the expression of someone performing an action they hadn't yet fully convinced themselves was real. Tony watched him count the heavy gold coins into a small leather pouch with the careful, deliberate attention of someone who had never been given money of their own and didn't want to take any of it for granted. He didn't say anything about it. Some things were better witnessed than commented on. They emerged from Gringotts into the sun of Diagon Alley with a copy of the petition filing, one very interesting photograph of a sealed document box, and Harry's money pouch. Tony looked down the alley at the list of required supplies and said, "What do you want to get first?" Harry had the list out and was reading it with the expression of someone attacking a problem. He had, in 6 months of living with Tony, become someone who approached problems like that, like they were solvable, like the information required to solve them was available if you looked for it, like the worst thing you could do was approach them with less than your full attention. Tony had not consciously taught him this. He suspected, with some complicated feeling, that it had been there all along, waiting for conditions in which it was safe to operate. "Robes last," Harry said. "Books first, then ingredients for potions, then equipment. Save the wand for," he looked up. "Is the wand last? You tell me, what's the most precise piece of kit on this list?" Harry thought for half a second. "The wand." "So, last," Harry said. "So nothing we do before affects the calibration." Tony pointed finger guns at him. They moved through the alley with the systematic efficiency of 2 people who were constitutionally allergic to browsing. Madame Malkin's for robes. The fitter was a pleasant, round woman who chatted while she worked, and who did a visible double-take when Tony walked in, and then an even more visible one when Harry's name was given, and who fitted Harry for school robes with the particular care of someone who had decided that this was a memorable morning. There was another boy being fitted at the same time, pale and blonde and immediately, visibly certain of his own importance in the way that Tony associated with kids whose parents told them they were special without explaining what for. "Hogwarts," the blonde boy said to Harry, making it sound like a greeting and a recruitment simultaneously. "Yeah," Harry said. "Me too. First year." He had the confidence of someone who had never had a conversation that didn't go his way. "Draco Malfoy." He extended his hand with the automatic expectation of a name that would mean something. Harry shook it. "Harry Potter." The expression on Draco Malfoy's face was immediate and involuntary, genuine surprise, recalibrating to something that wanted to be excitement, and was editing itself very quickly into something more controlled and socially strategic. Yeah," Harry said again, in the mild tone he'd developed for moments when the wizarding world tried to make him feel like a monument rather than a person. Draco recovered. "I could show you around when we get there. My family knows Hogwarts well." His eyes moved sideways to Tony, taking him in, recalibrating again. "Is that my dad?" Harry said, without hesitation, without looking at Tony. Tony looked straight ahead and managed, narrowly, not to show anything on his face. "A muggle," Draco said, in a tone that was aimed at being casual and landed somewhere closer to deliberate. It was the tone of someone testing a boundary and expecting it not to hold. Harry glanced at him pleasantly. "A billionaire," he said. "Bit of both, really." Draco's mouth opened, then it closed. He looked at Tony, who looked back with the expression of a man who had negotiated with senators, warlords, and the United Nations, and found all of them less interesting than the current 11-year-old holding his ground in a robe-fitting shop. The fitting finished without further incident. The bookshop, Flourish and Blots, was where they spent the most time, because Harry walked in, looked at the shelves, and went somewhere slightly glassy-eyed in the way Tony recognized from his own experiences with hardware stores at age 11. He got the required texts in about 8 minutes, and then stood in front of the history section with the list in his pocket and the expression of a person having a quiet ethical argument with themselves about spending. "Get what you want," Tony said from behind a copy of the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, which he had picked up with the intention of skimming and was now actually reading. "I've got enough with the—" "Harry," he turned a page. "Get what you want." Harry got 11 extra books. He carried them to the counter himself, and paid for 8 of them with his own money before Tony added the other 3, which Harry pretended not to notice, and Tony pretended wasn't happening. The last stop was Ollivander's. The shop was narrow and dim and smelled of sawdust and something older. The shelves went up farther than the space should have allowed, which Tony's watch scanner noted with what he was increasingly interpreting as electronic bewilderment. An old man appeared from between the shelves with the abruptness of someone who had mastered dramatic timing over decades. "Mr. Potter," Ollivander said, and his voice was soft and precise. "I wondered when I'd be seeing you." His pale eyes moved to Tony, assessed, filed. "And Mr. Stark, how interesting." "You know who I am," Tony said. "I know who everyone who has ever bought a wand is," Ollivander said pleasantly. "And I know a great deal about everyone who matters to them. Please." He gestured to a chair, then seemed to reconsider. "No, actually stand. The wand arm needs room." Harry was measured, which he submitted to with patience, and then began the process. The first wand produced a reaction that Tony's watch scanner spiked on immediately, not violently, but sharply, a frequency shift in the ambient readings that was distinct and traceable. Ollivander whisked it away. The second did nothing. The third made Harry's face change briefly, some echo of something personal moving through it and passing, and Ollivander shook his head with the thoughtful expression of someone reading a complicated text. "Curious," he said. He disappeared between the shelves and came back with a box that he treated with a particular kind of attention. "Holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, nice and supple." He held it out. "Go on." Harry took the wand. Tony's watch scanner went off the scale. Not alarmingly, it wasn't a dangerous spike. It was an enthusiastic one, the readings jumping across frequencies in a pattern that Friday, in his ear, said quietly was not random, boss. That's structured. That's almost like warmth and gold light moved through the shop. The sawdust shifted. An old and quiet and entirely certain sound settled over everything, the way a key in a lock makes a sound of rightness that you feel more than hear. Harry was staring at the wand in his hand. "Interesting," Ollivander said softly. "Most interesting. The wand that gave you that scar, its brother, Mr. Potter, its twin core." He looked at Harry with his pale eyes. "I expect you'll do great things. Great things." Harry looked at the wand. Then, after a moment, at Tony. Tony was looking at his watch scanner. Friday was already processing. The frequency pattern from the moment Harry had taken the wand, structured, she'd said, almost like what? "Like an arc reactor resonance signature," she said in his ear. "Not identical, but the underlying mathematical structure, the waveform architecture, it's comparable, like the same type of mathematics describing different phenomena." Tony stood very still in the narrow, dim shop. He looked at the readings. He looked at Harry, who was examining his wand with focused attention, turning it slowly in his fingers. He looked at the numbers. The thing that happened next, in the private space of his own head, was the same thing that had happened when he'd first looked at arc reactor theory, when he'd first understood what the chess piece could mean beyond the immediate problem it was solving. A door opening. An enormous, poorly lit, endlessly deep room that he had just found the entrance to. "Friday," he murmured. "I know," she said. He paid for the wand. He didn't say anything until they were outside, back in the alley, where the afternoon was settling into gold and the magical world was moving around them in its oblivious, ancient, entirely unaware of what had just occurred way. Harry looked at him. "What happened in there? You went quiet." "I go quiet sometimes." "No," Harry said with the directness of someone who had spent 6 months learning the difference between Tony's varieties of silence. "You don't." Tony looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "What do you know about arc reactors?" Harry blinked. "I mean, I've read everything available publicly about the technology. I know the basic. The resonance output. When the reactor is at peak output, it produces a specific waveform. Very specific. Mathematically distinct." Tony held up his watch. "When you took that wand, the readings I got from the ambient magical energy in this shop matched that waveform architecture. Not exactly, but in the same language." Harry stared at him. "Magic and arc reactors are related. Not related, they might, and I want to stress the might because I need 6 weeks in a workshop before I know anything for sure. They might be compatible, or they might operate on the same fundamental principle at a level we haven't described yet. He looked down the alley. Either way, Harry said, you're going to build something. I've already started designing in my head, Tony admitted. Started when you took the wand. Don't tell Pepper, Harry laughed. Then he was quiet for a moment, turning the wand over in his fingers. What kind of something? Tony looked at him, at the wand, at his watch, at the boy standing in the middle of a cobblestoned, impossible alley with 11 years of bad luck behind him, and what appeared to be a genuinely extraordinary future clicking into place around him. Come back to the workshop with me, Tony said. I'll show you the first sketches tonight. They started walking back toward the leaky cauldron, arms full of books and supplies, moving through the crowd of a world that had just become significantly more complicated and significantly more interesting, which were often the same thing. Halfway down the alley, Harry said, I told Draco Malfoy you were my dad. I noticed. Is that, a pause, brief. Is that okay? Tony looked straight ahead for a moment. The alley was loud and crooked and full of magic in the literal, newly confirmed by sensor data sense of the word, and the sky above it was very blue. Yeah, he said. That's okay. He didn't look at Harry when he said it, and Harry didn't look at him, and both of them kept walking, and the space between the words sat there for a second before getting quietly and permanently folded into the fabric of things. That night, in the London hotel, Tony spread everything out. The watch scanner data from Diagon Alley covered 3 digital displays. Friday had processed the Gringotts electromagnetic readings, and the Ollivander spike separately, then overlaid them on a composite model that was making the kind of low-level algorithmic sounds she made when something was resolved, and something new and larger had opened up in its place. Harry was on the sofa with Hogwarts, a history, reading with the focused consumption of someone who had been starved for information about a world they'd just been handed the key to. He'd been reading for 2 hours. He'd asked 3 questions, all of them good, and then gone back to the book. Tony had answered all 3. Okay, Tony said, at about midnight, standing in front of the displays. Friday, talk me through the waveform correlation again. Arc reactor output at peak generates a waveform with these harmonic intervals. She highlighted the pattern. The ambient magical energy in Ollivander's baseline has a different waveform, different frequency, different medium. But the structural architecture of the peaks and intervals, the mathematical skeleton, matches to about 73%. 73 is correlation. It's very high correlation for 2 phenomena that aren't supposed to know each other exist. What's the 27%? I think that's the difference between them, Friday said. I think arc reactor energy is describing the same phenomenon as magic in different terms. The way Newtonian and quantum mechanics can describe the same event from different frameworks. And if you bridged the gap, Tony stared at the display. If you built a system that ran both, I don't know what happens, Friday said. Theoretically, the output would be, the math suggests something very large. Tony tapped his fingers against his mouth. Behind him, he heard Harry close his book. You're thinking about the suit, Harry said. Tony turned around. Harry was looking at him from the sofa with the clear-eyed, unhurried attention of someone who had followed the logic chain to its end point. You said tonight you'd show me sketches, Harry said. And then you got distracted by the data, but you've been in front of those screens for 2 hours thinking about the suit. He paused. A suit for me. Tony looked at him for a moment. Then he said, How long have you been following the line of reasoning? Since Ollivander's. Harry set the book on the cushion beside him. Your face changed when you heard what Friday said in your earpiece, and then you asked me about arc reactors. And then you went into your design brain. He pulled his knees up. You've built 3 versions of the suit. You keep revising it because you keep learning things you didn't know before. Now you've got a new data input. He paused. What would a suit that ran on magic and arc reactor energy together actually do? Tony crossed the room and sat in the chair across from him. He leaned forward. Best case scenario, he said, dropping into the direct register he used when Harry was engaging seriously. We'd have a power source that was self-reinforcing. The arc reactor stabilizes and focuses the magical output. The magic amplifies and extends the reactor's frequency range. Combined output would be, he stopped. I need to run the numbers more carefully. But bigger. Significantly. And the wand, Harry said. You'd integrate the wand somehow. Or the wand's principles, focusing arrays built into the gauntlets. You'd be able to cast through the suit, but with the suit's power behind it. Harry was quiet for a moment. What if my magic is too irregular? He made a small gesture. It's been unpredictable. I've never been trained. That's what Hogwarts is for, Tony said. You spend the year learning control, and I spend the year doing what I do, which is understanding the engineering problem well enough to build around it. You're not walking into a magic school without backup. He looked at Harry steadily. You're never walking into anything without backup again. Harry held his gaze. Something in it was still adjusting, still running the check. This is real, this is actually real, but the delay was almost gone. Okay, he said. Okay, Tony agreed. Now go to sleep, it's midnight. You're not sleeping. I'm an adult, the rules are different. That's not a principle, Harry said. That's just an assertion. Tony pointed at the hallway. Harry went, grinning, book under his arm, in the unhurried way of someone who had decided some time ago that the world was generally going to turn out better than expected, which was itself a kind of triumph. Tony turned back to his displays. Friday hummed quietly through the data, and Tony stood in the middle of the London night with the skyline beyond the window and the first rough architecture of something enormous beginning to build itself in the back of his mind. The suit had a name already, he realized. He'd thought of it in Ollivanders without registering it consciously, the way the best names arrived. Marauder. He wrote it at the top of the first sketch file. Then he got to work. Chapter 3. Marauder 6 weeks. That was how long Tony had between Diagon Alley and September 1st, and he treated every hour of it like a man who had been handed a deadline by the universe, and had decided the universe had underestimated him. The workshop became a different place. It had always been Tony's space, organized by his logic, which was to say organized in a way that looked like chaos and functioned like a Swiss watch. But in those 6 weeks, it became something shared. Harry was in it every day, not as an observer and not as a student exactly, but as a collaborator in the specific way that Tony found he could only work with people who thought in problems rather than answers. Harry thought in problems. He asked questions that identified the load-bearing assumptions, then went quiet and thought, and then came back with a suggestion that was occasionally wrong and occasionally so right that Tony had to stop what he was doing. The first week was theory. Tony explained what he knew about arc reactor physics, which was everything, and what he knew about magical energy systems, which was what 6 weeks of obsessive research had produced. Harry read everything Tony gave him and the Hogwarts textbooks simultaneously, switching between them with the ease of someone who had decided that physics and magic were the same conversation happening in different dialects. He annotated both. Tony discovered this when he found Harry's copy of the Standard Book of Spells with penciled marginal notes connecting spell mechanics to arc reactor frequency data from the Diagon Alley scans. He photographed the annotations. He used 3 of them directly. The second week was materials. Tony sourced a titanium-vibranium composite from a contact at Wackenden Trade and Exports who owed him a professional courtesy and was not told what it was for. He scaled every component for Harry's current dimensions with the specific engineering requirement that the suit be upgradable, not just in capability but in size, because Harry was 11 and would not remain 11, and building a suit that became useless when its user grew 6 inches was not engineering. It was just expensive negligence. Friday modeled the growth projections. Tony looked at them and quietly extended the structural tolerances by 30%. The third and fourth weeks were the arc reactor integration. This was where it got complicated. And complicated was the word Tony used in the workshop, and terrifying was the word he used in his own head at 3 in the morning when the numbers were refusing to behave. The miniaturized arc reactor he'd designed for the suit was smaller than anything he'd built before, calibrated to Harry's magical frequency signature, which Friday had mapped extensively from the Ollivander's data and subsequently refined using readings she took when Harry did accidental magic, which happened infrequently, but reliably when he was concentrating hard on something else. The signature was consistent. That was the key thing. It had a fingerprint, and that fingerprint matched the waveform architecture of the reactor output at a correlation level that, by week 4, Friday had updated to 89%. Tony stood in front of that number for about 10 minutes the morning it came in. 89, he said. 89, Friday confirmed. That's not correlation anymore. Number, that's the same phenomenon. That's what I think, Friday said carefully, because she was good enough to be careful with a claim that large. I think Harry's magic and arc reactor energy are both accessing the same underlying mechanism, something we don't have a name for yet. Tony was quiet. Boss, I'm fine, he said. I'm processing. You've been processing for 10 minutes. It's a big thing to process. He went back to work. The 5th week was the gauntlets, which were the most technically demanding component and the one Harry was most invested in. The focusing arrays took Tony 4 attempts to get right. The first 3 produced wand channeling effects that were accurate but dampened the magical output, which was the wrong direction entirely. The 4th iteration, built with a crystalline lattice structure that Harry had suggested after reading a chapter on wand core properties in Ollivander's Compendium of Wandcraft, worked. They tested it in the workshop, Harry in the partial assembly, just the gauntlets, nothing else, with a piece of parchment taped to the far wall as a target. Harry pointed the gauntlet. Thought incendio with the focused intention his week of pre-Hogwarts reading had given him, which was less than formal training and more than nothing. The parchment didn't catch fire. The parchment, the wall behind it, and approximately 18 inches of drywall ceased to exist. There was a short silence. Too much, Harry said. Little bit, Tony agreed, already pulling up the calibration interface. Harry looked at the wall, then at the gauntlet. Something in his expression was very still in the way that Tony had come to recognize as Harry encountering something that matched a private internal measurement he'd been keeping to himself. Not shock, not quite, more like confirmation. The suit amplifies it, Harry said. Significantly. How significantly? Tony looked at the readings. Based on that, he nodded at the wall. At least a factor of 8. Probably more once we've got the full assembly integrated and the reactor is at operating capacity. Harry looked at the wall again, then back at the gauntlet on his hand, turning it slowly. At school, he said. What are the rules? Officially, you're a first-year student. You do what first-year students do. Tony crossed to the calibration panel. Unofficially, you're a kid I've spent 6 weeks building redundant safety systems into a suit for, so the rules are that you use it if you need it, you use it proportionally if possible, and you don't hide it. Harry looked up. What? The suit, Tony said, without looking away from the panel. You don't hide it. You don't pretend you don't have it. You don't make yourself smaller because the other kids are first years and you're. He gestured at the wall. You're you. He pulled up the calibration screen. The world adjusting to what you are is the world's problem. You don't make it your problem by making yourself invisible. Harry was very quiet for a moment. The Dursleys spent a long time telling me I was wrong, he said, not bitterly, just plainly. I know. And at school, the other school before this, I figured out pretty early that if I was better than Dudley at something, it went badly for me at home. I know that too. So I got used to. Harry. Tony set down the panel and looked at him directly. That was survival. That was the right call for that situation. This is a different situation. You're in a world that is going to look at you and see a symbol, and the only way to deal with that is to be so specifically and completely yourself that the symbol can't fit. He paused. Also, you have a suit, it helps. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Then the corner of his mouth moved. Did you just give me an inspirational speech? I gave you tactical advice. It sounded like a speech. It wasn't a speech. There was a pause at the end. For emphasis, Tony said. That's a rhetorical device, not a speech. Harry grinned fully. The delay was gone. Had been gone for weeks, Tony had noticed, and he'd filed it away and hadn't said anything because some things were better just witnessed. Week 6 was the AI. Friday JR. Was the component Tony spent the most time on and the least time explaining. He built her over 5 days, drawing on Friday's architecture but making something new, lighter, younger, quicker with humor, calibrated to the specific rhythms of how Harry thought. He modeled aspects of her personality matrix on observed data, which was a technical way of saying he built an AI that would talk to Harry the way Harry needed to be talked to, which was directly and without condescension, and with a willingness to be argued with. He introduced her on the last Sunday before September 1st, with the full suit assembly standing in the middle of the workshop floor under a drop cloth. Harry came downstairs at 7 in the morning and stopped dead in the doorway. The drop cloth was unnecessary drama, and Tony knew it. He pulled it off anyway. The suit was black, primarily, with gold detailing along the gauntlet arrays and the arc reactor housing in the chest, which glowed a steady blue-white and was visible even in the lit workshop. It was scaled for Harry's height and built with the precision of something that had been measured and remeasured, and it had the particular quality of Tony's best work, not just functional, not just powerful, but right, with the aesthetic coherence of a thing that understood what it was. Harry walked toward it slowly. He stopped in front of it and looked at it for a long moment without speaking. "Marauder Markai," Tony said from behind him. "Marauder," Harry said softly. He reached out and put his hand against the chest plate, fingers spread over the reactor glow. "Why Marauder?" "Your dad and his friends had a nickname for themselves," Tony said. "The Marauders. I found it in the documents from the Gringotts box, in your family history file. It felt right." Harry kept his hand on the chest plate. His face was turned away and Tony didn't push to see it. "Also," said a new voice, bright and slightly amused, emerging from the suit's speaker system, "I think it suits him. He does have a face that could cause some mayhem." Harry pulled back slightly. "Who? Friday JR. She said. "Hello, Harry, I've been waiting to meet you." "Your dad talks about you constantly." "I don't," Tony started. "He does," Friday JR said serenely. "I was built from Friday's architecture. I have access to the workshop logs." A short pause. "He talked about the wand for 4 days. I was processing new data," Tony said. "He said, and I'm quoting, 'The resonance signature is extraordinary. She's extraordinary. He's going to be Friday JR. "Yes, boss. We'll discuss logging protocols later." "Of course." She sounded entirely untroubled. Harry was laughing, surprised and genuine, and Tony filed this away as a successful calibration test. "Can I put it on?" Harry asked. "That's what it's for." The suit assembled around Harry with the magnetic assist system that Tony had rigged specifically for the smaller frame. Quiet, precise, nothing theatrical. When it was fully assembled, Harry stood in the middle of the workshop floor in the Marauder Markai and was quiet for a moment. Then, "Oh, yeah," Tony said. "I can feel the reactor. That's the integration. Your magic is already calibrating to it. How does it feel?" Harry was still for a moment, interior, attending to something Tony couldn't observe. He paused. Like when you find the right grip on something, when everything's aligned. He raised his right hand, looked at the gold gauntlet array. "The wand is in the left gauntlet channel. Housing in the forearm. The arrays run through all 5 fingers." Harry extended his left hand. The fingers of the gauntlet spread slightly, an automatic calibration motion, and the arrays lit softly gold. He concentrated. A small, precise flame appeared above his palm, a candle flame, no more, and hovered there, perfectly controlled. He held it for 10 seconds, then released it, looked at Tony. "Factor of 8, he said. "More now that the reactor's online," Tony said. "I ran the numbers last night. Full integration, you're looking at factor 14 to 17. "Depends on the spell and your intent clarity." Harry considered this. That's a lot." "It is. I should probably learn how to control it properly before I use it." "You should," Tony agreed. "Fortunately, there's a school." The Hogwarts Express left from King's Cross Station at 11 on the dot, departing from platform 9 3/4. which existed between the perfectly ordinary 9 and 10 in the way that most impossible things existed, in plain sight, for people who knew how to look. Tony drove him. Not a driver, not happy, Tony, in the car, with Harry's trunk in the back and the Marauder's suit in a compressed carry case that looked like an ordinary backpack and contained about $4 million of engineering. Pepper had offered to come. Tony had told her it was fine. "You're not going to cry," Pepper had said on the phone that morning. "I'm not going to cry," Tony confirmed. "You cried at the end of Big Hero 6. That was an isolated incident. You cried twice. Pepper, I'm just noting that you have a precedent." He didn't cry at King's Cross. He came close once when Harry turned back from the barrier, after Tony had confirmed that yes, you just walk through it. And yes, he was sure, and yes, he would still be there when Harry came out on the other side and said, "You'll still be," and stopped. And Tony said, "I'll be right here," before he could finish the question, and something in Harry's face settled. Harry walked through the barrier. Tony walked through after him, because Friday had sensor-mapped the barrier frequency 3 days ago and he had a dedicated transceiver in his watch. The platform materialized around them, long, smoke-filled, bustling with families and owls and cats and trunks, the scarlet engine of the Hogwarts Express occupying it with the quiet authority of something that had been making this journey for a very long time. Harry looked at it. His eyes were doing the thing again, wide, mobile, cataloging. "Okay," he said. "It's a train," Tony said. "It's not just a train." "No," Tony agreed. "It's not." They loaded the trunk. Tony walked with Harry along the platform and didn't make it into something it wasn't. Didn't give a speech. Didn't make a list of rules. Didn't do any of the things he'd caught himself rehearsing at 2 in the morning, when the parental anxiety he'd developed somewhere around month 3 of Harry's residents had been loudest. He decided that the best send-off was just the ordinary continuation of how they were together, which was direct and a little dry and honest. "Friday Jr. has full comms," he said. "Anytime you need to reach me, she'll also monitor your vitals through the suit." "I know. The suit is in the bag. I've written the assembly sequence into the left gauntlet, 3-second hold on the inner wrist panel. It comes out fast." "I know. The Gringotts petition comes through in 2 weeks. Pepper's managing it. Whatever's in that sealed box will have it." "I know." Tony stopped. Harry stopped beside him. The train was giving preliminary steam-venting noises, families beginning to say their last things. Around them, children were hugging parents with the variety of performances that covered actual emotion, tight, clinging, quick and businesslike, tearful, laughing. Harry looked at him. "Don't be careful," Tony said. "Be yourself." Harry nodded. Then, without preamble and without the beat of deliberation that used to precede it, he stepped forward and hugged him, briefly and firmly, the way Harry did everything without fanfare, just complete. Tony hugged him back. "Go learn things," he said. "Break some rules, take good notes." Harry pulled back. He was smiling. He picked up the backpack that contained the Marauder and got on the train, and Tony watched the window until Harry appeared in it and lifted a hand, and the train moved. Harry found a compartment, stowed the backpack overhead, and sat down with Hogwarts, a history open on his knee, which was how Hermione Granger found him. She knocked on the compartment door frame, knocked, rather than just sliding it open, which Harry noted as a courtesy most people didn't extend, and said, "Is anyone sitting here? Everywhere else is full, or there are boys having a belching contest," which, she made a face. "No one," Harry said. She came in, sat across from him with her own book already in hand, and for about 90 seconds they read in the kind of silence that established itself between people who were both genuinely absorbed in what they were doing. Then she looked up and said, "Is that actually Hogwarts, a history? The full edition, not the abridged?" "Full edition," Harry said. "I've read it twice," she said, not competitively but as a kind of credential exchange. "Hermione Granger. Harry Potter." Her eyes did what most wizarding people's eyes did when they heard his name, widened, recalibrated. But then she did something different, which was that she visibly decided not to make it a thing, squared her shoulders, and said, Have you got to the section on the founder's enchantments? Because I have a theory about the structural inconsistency in Helga Hufflepuff's ward descriptions in Chapter 7. Harry looked at her for a moment. The description in Chapter 7 contradicts the archaeological survey published in Magical History Quarterly in 1987, he said. I think Hufflepuff's wards weren't structural. They were personal, keyed to intent rather than position. Hermione's expression shifted. The polite, slightly careful face she'd been wearing since she said his name rearranged itself into something more honest and considerably more interested. That's not in any of the texts. No, I worked it out from the energy signature descriptions. They're consistent with intent-keyed magic rather than location-based. Harry stopped. Sorry, my dad's an engineer. I approach most things in terms of energy systems. Your dad, she said, and this time she didn't recalibrate, just filed it and moved on, which Harry appreciated. That's actually useful. The standard analysis always treats the founder's magic as architectural, but if you apply she pulled out a notebook. It was already half full of neat, dense writing. Can I show you something? Harry put down Hogwarts, a history, and looked at her notebook. They were still talking when the trolley came. A boy appeared at the compartment door somewhere north of Swindon, red-haired and freckled, and carrying a large smear of something on his nose that appeared to be a failed cleaning charm. He looked at the empty seats back at the corridor and said, Everywhere's full, can I? Yeah, Harry said. Ron Weasley sat down with his packed lunch and the air of someone making the best of things. He watched Harry and Hermione with the wariness of someone being confronted with a level of academic enthusiasm he found mildly intimidating before 11 in the morning. Are you two actually arguing about Hogwarts, a history for fun? He said. We're not arguing, Harry said. We're refining a theory. Same thing, different temperature, Hermione said. Ron looked between them. He had, Harry noticed, an honest face, the kind that showed what it was thinking without particularly trying to conceal it. Currently it showed a mixture of bemusement and the kind of social longing that came from watching two people be comfortable together and wanting in. What's the theory? Harry explained it. Briefly, without being condescending about it, which Hermione noticed and appreciated in the way she appreciated efficiency. Ron listened with more genuine attention than his initial expression had suggested, and when Harry finished, he said, That explains why the corridor near the Hufflepuff common room always feels different. My brothers say it's warmer, and they said the Sorting Hat reacted weird once when someone with really bad intentions sat in it. Oh, that fits, Hermione said immediately. If the intent keying is building-wide and the hat operates within that framework, the hat might be reading the same signature, Harry finished. Ron blinked. I didn't actually know I was being useful. You were, Harry said. Do your brothers tell you a lot about the castle? Fred and George, they tell me everything about the castle. Most of it illegal. He said it with a pride that was entirely unconcealed. I'm Ron, by the way. Harry, this is Hermione. Ron looked at Harry for a moment, doing the same name recognition recalibration most people did, and then decided Harry could see the decision happening in real time, which he found refreshing, that it didn't actually change anything. Right, he said. You want a chocolate frog? I've got loads. They arrived at Hogsmeade Station in the dark, which gave Hogwarts the entrance it deserved, sudden and enormous across the black water of the lake, lit from within, impossible in the way of things that had existed long enough to stop apologizing for what they were. Harry sat in one of the boats and looked at it, and Friday Jr. said quietly through the near-invisible earpiece he was wearing, Your heart rate went up. I know, he murmured. Good kind or worried kind, he considered. The castle's reflection moved on the water. The night was clear and very still. Good kind. Thought so. The sorting was held in the Great Hall, under a ceiling that was the sky. Genuinely the sky, stars and all. A vast magical working that Harry filed for later analysis. In front of 4 long tables packed with students who were all staring at the incoming first years with the practiced assessment of people who had already been sorted and wanted to see where the new arrivals landed. Harry stood in the line and looked around the great hall the way he looked at a new engineering environment, systematically, starting from the large structures and moving to the details. Stone, candles, the sky ceiling, 4 tables with their colored banners, the staff table at the front. And at the center of it, an elderly man with a half-moon spectacles and a silver beard of extraordinary commitment, who was looking at the incoming first-years with an expression of benevolent attention that Harry's brain flagged almost immediately. He knew that expression. He'd seen it before, in different iterations, on people who thought several moves ahead and were always mildly pleased with themselves because events were proceeding along their anticipated lines. Tony wore a version of it sometimes. The difference was that Tony would tell you he was thinking 12 moves ahead. This man's expression suggested he preferred that you didn't know. Dumbledore caught Harry's eye across the hall, smiled warmly. Harry smiled back pleasantly and filed it. The sorting was alphabetical. Hermione went to Gryffindor. Ron went to Gryffindor. Draco Malfoy went to Slytherin before the hat had fully settled on his head, which Harry suspected said something about the strength of a certain kind of certainty. When Harry's name was called, the room went quiet with the particular quality of noise that sudden collective breath-holding produced. Harry sat on the stool. The hat came down over his eyes. The voice in his head was ancient and amused. Well, it said, "This is unusual. I've not seen this particular arrangement before." What arrangement? Harry thought back. A wizard who thinks like an engineer, or an engineer who turned out to be a wizard. The distinction is interesting. A pause. You could do well in any house, you know. The courage is undeniable. The intelligence is, frankly, extraordinary. The ambition is there under the practicality. And the loyalty, another pause, warmer. The loyalty is recent and fierce, and I suspect entirely unshakable. Where do I go? Where do you want to go? Harry thought about it. He thought about Hermione, who had spotted something worth arguing about and immediately argued about it with total conviction. He thought about Ron, who had decided the name didn't matter and offered a chocolate frog. He thought about what Tony had said on the platform, "Be yourself." He thought about the wall in the workshop, the precise, clean absence where 30 seconds of focused effort had removed 18 inches of drywall. Let me suggest, the hat said, that you are not someone who hides in the house that expects greatness. You're someone who produces it regardless. Gryffindor, Harry said. Gryffindor, the hat shouted. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry removed the hat, handed it to Professor McGonagall, who was looking at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read, and walked to the table. Hermione was already clapping. Ron was grinning. There was space between them, and Harry sat in it, and it felt, with the specific organic rightness of things that had always been going to happen, like where he belonged. The first week at Hogwarts was interesting for everyone involved, and Harry was only responsible for some of it. Professor Flitwick's Charms class in the second day found Harry completing the basic wand movement exercises for Wingardium Leviosa in about 3 minutes, getting the feather to the ceiling rather than the desk, and then spending the remaining time helping Neville Longbottom, who had turned his feather into something resembling damp paper, understand the physical mechanics of the levitation principle in terms of energy displacement rather than wand movement. Flitwick watched this with an expression oscillating between astonishment and delight. Professor Snape's potions class was a different register. Snape was a man who had constructed an entire pedagogy around the assumption that intelligence expressed itself through his particular framework or not at all, and Harry's first encounter with this framework went as follows. Snape asked, in the tone of someone already confident of the answer, "Potter, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormhood?" "Draught of living death," Harry said. The interaction between asphodel's soporific alkaloids and wormhood's amplifying properties produces a suspension compound that acts on the central nervous, on the magical nervous system. What I find interesting is that the temperature at which the asphodel is added affects the potency by roughly a factor of 3. Is the heating protocol specified in the standard instructions actually optimal, or is it just reproducible? The room was very quiet. Snape looked at him with a dark, unreadable expression. "You will find," he said, "that in this classroom you answer the questions asked of you." "I answered it," Harry said pleasantly. "I was just curious about the follow-up." 10 points from Gryffindor. For answering correctly? For answering at length. Harry noted this, filed it under Professor Snape. Interesting motivations, handle with care, and return to his cauldron. Hermione, beside him, was looking straight ahead with the expression of someone containing a very strong reaction with considerable effort. "Was I wrong?" Harry murmured. "You were completely right," she whispered back through gritted teeth. "Which made it worse?" Across the dungeon, Draco Malfoy was looking at Harry with an expression that had shifted, over the course of the exchange, from smug anticipation of humiliation to something more complicated. Harry caught his eye. Draco looked away. The first flying lesson came on Thursday, and it was here that the first full public performance of Harry's particular situation occurred, because Neville fell off his broom at 12 feet, hit the ground badly, clutched his wrist, and the broom, freed of its rider, began a slow wobble toward the greenhouse wall. Madame Hooch told everyone to stay grounded and rushed to Neville. Harry watched the broom's trajectory for about 2 seconds. It was going to hit the glass. The glass would break. That was a minor problem. The larger problem was the angle of the wobble, which was going to bring it down into the group of third years working in the greenhouse below. He reached into his bag, and his hand found the carry case with the 3-second press, and the marauder assembled around him in the open air of the grounds with the pneumatic hiss of compressed components finding their positions. The visor came down. "Friday, Jr." said trajectory locked, in the calm tone she used for problems that had solutions, and Harry flew, actually flew, not on a broom. The suit's propulsion was smooth and immediate and nothing like anything else. Across the courtyard, and caught the broom 6 feet from the greenhouse wall, redirected it safely, and landed in the grass with the kind of precision that came from 6 weeks of calibration and 2 of actual practice in the Nevada desert, where Tony had taken him for the 2nd week of August. He set the broom down. The entire class was staring at him. Madame Hooch was still staring at him from across the courtyard, Neville's wrist in her hands, expression completely arrested. Harry lifted the visor. The trajectory was going to hit the greenhouse. "What," said Ron Weasley from behind him, "is that?" "My suit," Harry said. Ron stared. "Your suit." "My dad built it," he considered. "We built it together mostly." "Your dad," Hermione said, arriving at Ron's elbow, looking at the marauder with the expression of someone encountering a structural engineering problem that was simultaneously a magical artifact, which was exactly what it was, "is Tony Stark." "Yes, the Iron Man Tony Stark. That's the one." Hermione looked at the suit, then at Harry, then at the suit again. Something enormous was happening behind her eyes, the rapid, sequential firing of about 14 connected realizations, which Harry recognized because he'd watched the same process in the workshop mirror. "The arc reactor," she said. "And magic. You found a way to—" "Yeah," Harry said. She stopped. "That is the most interesting thing I've ever seen." From across the courtyard, Draco Malfoy was standing with 3 Slytherins, staring at the suit with an expression that had moved, completely involuntarily, into something that was mostly awe and was extremely unhappy about being awe. Madame Hooch recovered first. She gave Harry a long, unreadable look, said she was escorting Neville to the hospital wing, and that everyone else was to stay on the ground, and then walked away without saying anything about the suit, which Harry interpreted as a decision to pass this particular situation to a higher authority. The higher authority was McGonagall, who found Harry after dinner. She stood in the corridor outside the Great Hall and said, "Follow me, please, Potter," in the tone of a woman who had decided to have a very specific conversation in a private location. Her office was spare and precise like her. She sat behind the desk, looked at him for a moment, and said, "The suit." "Yes, Professor." You flew it on school grounds without a broomstick. Neville's broom was going to damage the greenhouse. There is a protocol for that situation. With respect, Harry said, the protocol was standing over a student with a broken wrist. The broom wasn't waiting. He paused. I caught it cleanly. No one was hurt. The greenhouse is intact. McGonagall looked at him. Harry had noticed in the 4 days since term started, the capacity to look at someone in a way that extracted information without asking for it. She was doing it now, reading him, calibrating, making some kind of assessment. The suit, she said again. Your father built it. We built it together. It runs on arc reactor technology. And magic, Harry said. The two energy systems are compatible. The suit's reactor integrates with my magical frequency. They amplify each other. A beat of silence. That, McGonagall said carefully, is something that has not been attempted before. I know. In 900 years of recorded magical history. I know, Harry waited. Is it against school rules? It's not, she said slowly, currently addressed by school rules. Because no one has ever had cause to write a rule about it. She was quiet for a moment. I am going to need to inform the headmaster. I assumed you would, Harry said, and I am going to recommend you for the Gryffindor Quidditch team. She said it with the abrupt delivery of someone who had decided two things simultaneously and was announcing the less complicated one first. Then, at Harry's expression, a first year on the team is unprecedented. The suit, however, if you're not using it during a match, I'd fly on a broom for Quidditch, Harry said. The suit's not a sports tool. Something in McGonagall's face settled, like a final piece of an assessment clicking into place. Very well, she stood. You may go, Potter. Harry stood. At the door, he paused. Professor McGonagall, the headmaster, when he's informed. Could you tell me what he says? She looked at him. That would be an unusual request. I know. He met her eyes. He already knew I was coming. He knows a lot about me. I'd like to know if what I'm doing surprises him. He paused. Or if he expected it. McGonagall held his gaze for a long moment. Her expression was unreadable in the particular way of people who were feeling something and had very good control. Then she said, I will tell you that he was not surprised by the suit, Potter. He was not surprised at all. Harry nodded. He went back to the Gryffindor common room, where Ron was waiting with questions and Hermione had already written 4 pages of theoretical notes. And he sat down in the firelight and thought about a man in a high chair at the staff table who had smiled when their eyes met. The warm and knowing smile of someone watching events proceed exactly as planned. He thought about it for a long time. Then he took out his notebook and started writing too. Chapter 4. The Mirror and the Chessman. Halloween arrived at Hogwarts the way it always did, with excessive decoration, a feast of architectural ambition, and the specific restless energy of a castle that had been celebrating the same night for 900 years and had gotten very good at it. The Great Hall was genuinely impressive. Harry sat between Ron and Hermione at the Gryffindor table and looked at the 1,000 candles floating in the carved pumpkins overhead and thought about the energy required to sustain the enchantment. Continuous, distributed, almost certainly drawing from the castle's foundational wards rather than any individual caster. And then stopped himself because Hermione had told him twice in the last week that he was allowed to just look at things without immediately reverse engineering them. You're doing the engineering face, she said, without looking up from her bread roll. I was appreciating the decorations. You were calculating load distribution. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. Ron was eating. Ron ate at feasts with the complete and unironic dedication of someone who understood exactly what a feast was for. He had explained to Harry in the second week of term that growing up with 6 siblings calibrated your relationship with food in specific ways. And Harry had understood this immediately, and in a direction Ron hadn't expected, and they had sat in comfortable and unusual silence for a moment before Ron said, yeah, exactly, mate, without Harry having said anything. The feast progressed. The food was extraordinary in the specific way of magic applied to cooking. Not better ingredients, just more of everything at once, flavors that were somehow fuller than they should have been, textures that hit correctly. Harry ate properly, which was itself something he was still adjusting to, the simple physical fact of eating until he was full without the background calculation of whether there would be anything later. He was most of the way through a second helping of roast when Professor Quirrell ran into the great hall. It was theatrical. Harry noticed that first, the door flung wide, the stumbling entrance, the dramatic pause before the announcement. Quirrell had a quality that Harry had been cataloging since the first defense against the dark arts class. He was performing something that wasn't quite himself. The stutter was inconsistent. It appeared under observation and faded when he thought no one was watching. Harry had mentioned this to Hermione, who had said that's quite an accusation for a first year to make about a teacher, and then written it in her notebook. "Troll," Quirrell gasped, clutching the door frame. "In the dungeons, thought you ought to know." He collapsed into a chair with the apparent exhaustion of someone who had run a very long way, or the practiced exhaustion of someone performing it. The great hall erupted. Dumbledore stood, raised his hands, restored order with the practiced ease of a man who had done this before, and directed the prefects to lead students to their dormitories. The hall moved with the chaotic, controlled urgency of several hundred people following instructions they weren't entirely sure about. In the commotion, Harry leaned toward Ron. "Hermione's not here." Ron's face changed. "She went to the bathroom before the feast. She was in the corridor on the second. They were already moving." Harry pulled the carry case out of his bag as they pushed against the flow of students, and Friday Jr. said in his earpiece, "Troll signatures are unusual," reading something on the second floor that isn't matching standard magical fauna profiles in her calm voice, which was more immediately useful than the general panic around him. He hit the wrist panel without breaking stride. The marauder assembled in the corridor, students scattering back with shouts of alarm and excitement that Harry didn't have time to manage, and he moved. "Location," he said. "Second floor girls' bathroom, northwest corridor." "She's in there, her bracelet tracker is stationary." Friday Jr. had, at Harry's request and with Tony's engineering, built a proximity tracker into the small bracelet Hermione wore, after a second-week incident involving a particularly aggressive Cornish pixie in Flitwick's class. Hermione had accepted this with the pragmatism of someone who regarded personal safety as a systems optimization problem. "Ron," Harry said. Ron, running alongside him and slightly breathless, said, "Yeah. Stay back when I go in." "Absolutely not," Ron said without heat, just matter-of-factly. "She's my friend too." Harry looked at him through the visor. Ron met his eyes with the expression of someone who had decided something and wasn't interested in discussing whether he'd decided correctly. Harry had seen that face on Tony during board meetings, and it always meant the same thing. "Fine," he said. "Stay behind me." The troll was in the corridor outside the bathroom. It was 12 feet tall, roughly the dimensions of a large vehicle, and it smelled like something had decided to live inside something else that had already died. It was dragging a club the size of a tree trunk along the corridor wall, leaving gouges in the stone, and it was between them and the bathroom door. Harry looked at it. Friday Jr. ran a 2-second analysis. 12 feet, approximately 1,100 kilograms. The club is load-bearing for its attack pattern. It compensates for poor binocular vision with wide, sweeping strikes. Eyes are the primary sensor input. If you disrupt the visual field— "I see it," Harry said. He hit the repulsor charge on the right gauntlet at 30%, a calibration he'd established during Nevada practice for situations requiring precision over power, and put it into the stone wall 6 feet above the troll's head. The explosion of dust and debris was controlled and exactly where he wanted it. The troll stopped, turned. Its small eyes found the cloud of debris and then found Harry, and it did what trolls apparently always did when confronted with something they didn't understand, which was attempt to hit it. The club came around in a wide horizontal sweep, exactly as Friday Jr. had predicted, and Harry went up. Straight up, 4 meters, while the club passed beneath him with the displaced air of something very large moving very fast through a space that was suddenly empty. Behind him, he heard Ron say something unprintable. "Hermione," Harry said loudly. "The door now." The bathroom door opened. Hermione emerged, pale, hair more chaotic than usual, but her jaw set in the specific way Harry had come to associate with her deciding to function through fear rather than despite it, which was different and considerably braver. She looked at the troll. She looked at Harry in the air above it. She looked at Ron, who had found a piece of broken stone and was holding it with the heroic optimism of someone who knew it was useless and was doing it anyway. "The left ankle," she said, pointing at the troll. "There's a calcification on the tendon. I noticed it was favoring that side in the corridor." She had apparently taken a structural survey of the troll on the way to hiding in the bathroom. This was very Hermione. "Friday," Harry said. "She's right, Friday Jr., confirmed. Left ankle, stress fracture consistent with repetitive strain. That leg won't hold full weight under impact." Harry came down from the ceiling, pivoted, and hit the left ankle with a precisely calibrated repulsor blast, not enough to break, enough to buckle. The troll lurched. The club swung wide, hit its own momentum, and the troll followed it in a slow and inevitable topple, the way large things fell, with tremendous commitment and no way to stop. It hit the floor hard enough to shake the corridor. The stone cracked. 3 portraits on the wall expressed their opinions loudly. The troll groaned, moved once, and stopped. Harry landed. Ron let out a long, slow breath. Hermione walked over from the bathroom doorway, looked at the troll on the floor, and said, "That took 38 seconds. "Friday had it at 36, Harry said, lifting the visor. "I was counting from when you left the ground." She looked at him. Her voice was completely steady and her hands were shaking slightly, which Harry noticed and didn't point out because pointing it out would have embarrassed her. "Are you all right? I wasn't in any danger." "I know. Are you all right?" He looked at her. "Yeah." She nodded once, then looked at the troll again. "We should probably be here when the teachers arrive. It will look odd if we're not." She paused. "Also, I think Ron should be holding that piece of stone in a more convincing way." Ron looked at the stone in his hand. "What do you mean more convincing? Like you used it," she said. "Hit something with it." Ron hit the floor once with the stone, looked up. "Better. Much," she said. The teachers arrived 2 minutes later. McGonagall's expression when she entered the corridor, at the troll on the floor, at the 3 first-years standing beside it, at Harry's suit, went through approximately 4 distinct phases. Snape was behind her, and his expression did one thing and stayed there. Quirrell brought up the rear and looked at Harry and the Marauder with the kind of attention that was very carefully organized to look like shock. Harry looked back at Quirrell, through the visor, for exactly long enough to confirm what he'd been thinking since the Great Hall entrance. Not surprised. Quirrell was not surprised by the troll. He was performing surprise in the way he performed his stutter, consistently enough to fool most observers, inconsistently enough for anyone paying the right kind of attention. Harry filed it, sealed it, saved it for later. McGonagall gave them all detention in a tone that managed to convey simultaneously that they deserved it, that she thought they were all completely insane, and that she was privately relieved. Snape said nothing, which was somehow worse. Quirrell said they were very lucky. "We were," Harry agreed pleasantly. "But so was everyone in the path of that troll." He paused. "Interesting that it ended up specifically outside the second-floor bathroom, though. Of all the corridors." Quirrell blinked. "Trolls they wander." "They do," Harry said. "Into occupied castles." He smiled at Quirrell. Quirrell smiled back. It was a perfectly ordinary exchange between a professor and a student, except that both of them knew it wasn't, and both of them knew the other knew. November made Hogwarts cold in the way of stone buildings that were very old and had very high ceilings, and Harry discovered 2 things in November. That Quidditch was the most purely enjoyable physical experience he'd had since the first suit flight in Nevada, and that the 3rd-floor corridor was bothering him more than he'd been admitting. The corridor was behind a locked door that Dumbledore had announced at the start of term was off-limits on pain of a most painful death, which was a strange thing to tell students in any context, and a very specific kind of invitation if you thought about it at a particular angle. Harry thought about it at that angle. He discussed it with Hermione, who agreed the phrasing was unusual, and Ron, who said that everyone said there was something being guarded in there, something important, and that his brother Charlie had mentioned to their mum that something had been moved from Gringotts. Gringotts, Harry said. Yeah, some kind of robbery attempt in August, apparently. High-security vault. Ron stirred his hot chocolate, but they'd already moved whatever it was. To here, Hermione said. They moved it here. To the 3rd floor, Harry said. Specifically. He thought about the ministry letter. He thought about the sealed document box in his vault. He thought about Dumbledore's CC line at the bottom of the letter, like a detail placed casually that wasn't casual. He thought about Quirrell's not surprise at the troll, and Quirrell's not stutter when he forgot to maintain it, which Harry had now observed 3 times. Friday, he said, that evening in the dormitory after the others were asleep. Do we know about Gringotts' vault break-ins in the last decade? Friday, Jr. Ran what she had, which was limited. Magical world news didn't cross into digital infrastructure reliably, but she found a thread of cross-reference. A small item in a financial news archive about an anomalous security event at a London private banking institution in July of this year. No details. The item had been suppressed quickly, which itself told a story. July. The Hogwarts letter had come in July. The timing wasn't coincidental. Nothing, Harry was increasingly convinced, was coincidental. He wrote to Tony. He did this through a coded system they'd set up before September. Harry wrote in what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary letter home, with specific phrases in specific positions that Friday Jr. encrypted and Friday decrypted at the other end. He described the troll incident, which Tony had already partially reconstructed from the Marauders' mission logs. He described the 3rd floor corridor. He described Quirrell. Tony's reply, 3 days later, good instincts on Quirrell. I'm running a background check. The corridor thing, what are they protecting? Get me whatever you can without going in. Emphasis on the without going in part. Pepper says hi. I've been in the workshop for 36 hours, Friday tells me, which is a number she should not have volunteered. Harry smiled at the letter, folded it, tucked it away. He did not yet go in. The Mirror of Arist found him in December. He'd been exploring, a habit he'd developed in the quiet of early mornings before breakfast, when the castle was still and showed itself differently than it did under the noise of a school day. He'd found 3 rooms that weren't on the standard castle map, a staircase that changed direction based on the weather, and a suit of armor near the 7th floor that appeared to be singing very quietly to itself. He'd noted all of these. The mirror was in a room on the 4th floor that he hadn't passed before. The door was ajar, which was the kind of detail he'd stopped treating as coincidental. Inside, dusty floor, tall room, winter light through high windows, and a mirror standing alone in the center of the space like something that had been left to be found. It was tall, taller than he was, with an ornate gold frame and words carved along the top. Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oit on wosi. Harry looked at it from the doorway for a moment, then crossed the threshold and looked. The figure in the mirror was him, older, maybe, or just more settled, with the same dark hair and eyes, and beside him were 2 people he'd never seen but recognized with a certainty that was physical, visceral, a punch to the chest dressed up as recognition. A woman with red hair and green eyes like his, and a man with dark, untidy hair and glasses, both of them laughing at something, and the older Harry in the mirror was laughing too, and they were all together, and it was. He stood there for a moment. Just a moment. Friday, he said quietly, I'm here. Can you tell me what this mirror does, magically? She ran a scan. The enchantment on it is, it's a desire reflection charm. Complex old, it's showing you what you want most. I know what I want most, Harry said. He looked at the mirror, at his parents' faces. I know what this is, I've read about it. Do you want me to? Number, he kept his voice even. I'm okay. He stood there for another few seconds, giving himself that, giving the image that, the laughing, the togetherness, the thing that had been missing so long it had the particular ache of a name he'd never learned to say. Then he stepped back from the mirror. I'm okay, he said again, and this time it was to himself. He was about to leave when he heard footsteps in the corridor, and instead of leaving he stepped to the side of the door and waited, and Dumbledore walked in. The headmaster stopped when he saw Harry. His expression, for just a fraction of a second, showed something Harry read as recalibration, not surprise, but an adjustment of timing. Like a plan that had expected an event at step 7 and countering that event at step 4. "Harry," Dumbledore said warmly, "I thought I might find you here." "Did you leave the door open?" Harry asked. A pause. "I may have." Harry looked at the mirror, then at Dumbledore. "What does it show you?" "Ah," the old man smiled, the warm and ancient smile of someone very comfortable with not fully answering questions. "That is a personal thing. What does it show you?" "My parents," Harry said. "And me, older." Dumbledore nodded slowly. "It shows us nothing more or less than the deepest and most desperate desire of our hearts." He moved toward the mirror with the familiarity of someone who had stood before it before. "A dangerous object in the wrong circumstances." "Because you'd stay in front of it," Harry said, "looking at something that isn't real." "Precisely. But the mirror's not dangerous," Harry said. "The desire isn't dangerous. The question is what you do with it." He paused. "My dad would say the only productive response to wanting something you can't have is to build what you can." Dumbledore looked at him. The warm smile was in place, but something underneath it was doing more work than usual. "Your father," he said. "Tony Stark." "Yes. He has made quite an impression on the wizarding world in the month since he became your guardian." A pause, carefully measured. "There are many who wonder about the wisdom of a child with your particular significance being raised in the Muggle world." "They can keep wondering," Harry said pleasantly. "It's worked out fine." "Has it?" Dumbledore's voice was gentle, genuinely so, in the way that his genuine things were always the most dangerous because they were true and were still being used. "Your parents left you a world, Harry, a world that needs to understand you and that you need to understand. There are preparations, I should say, that were always intended for your time at Hogwarts, foundations for what lies ahead." "I know about the stone," Harry said. The gentleness didn't change. But something behind it went very still. "Do you—" "Nicholas Flamel, the Philosopher's Stone. It was moved from Gringotts, Vault 713, I'd guess, based on the timing, to here, to the 3rd floor." Harry kept his voice conversational, which was something Tony had taught him. The most effective way to demonstrate that you know something is to be bored by the drama of knowing it. "Someone's trying to steal it. I think you know who, and I think you're using the stone and the danger of it as an environment." He watched Dumbledore's face with the same attention he gave sensor readouts. "A test environment. For me." The silence in the room was the kind that had weight. "That," Dumbledore said after a moment, "is a remarkable set of conclusions for a first-year student. I've had good training. From Mr. Stark. From him, yes, and from paying attention." Harry turned to fully face the headmaster. He wasn't angry. He'd thought about this long enough that the anger had processed into something more useful, which was clarity. "I'm not a piece on a board, Professor. I understand you're trying to protect me. I understand you've been doing it since before I was old enough to be consulted about it. But placing me at number 4 Privet Drive, and sealing my family's documents, and leaving the stone in a corridor of a school full of children is protection that looks different depending on where you're standing." Dumbledore was very still. In the candlelight of the high room he looked ancient and genuinely, privately troubled, which was the most honest Harry had seen his face. "I made choices," Dumbledore said quietly. "Choices I believed necessary." "I know you believed that. And you disagree." "I think," Harry said carefully, "that you're the kind of person who loves people and still treats them as instruments when the stakes are high enough. And I think you're doing it right now, the open door, this room, this conversation. I think you want to see who I am under pressure." He paused. "I also think you're not a bad man. I think you're someone who got used to doing the necessary hard things so long ago that you don't always notice when you're doing it to someone who didn't agree to it." Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. The fire of the candles was the only sound. Outside, the castle settled in its old stones. "You are," Dumbledore said at last, "not what I expected." "I know," Harry said. That's the part I'm going to make work for me. He looked at the mirror one more time. The reflection was gone, just him, now alone in the glass, which was somehow both worse and better. He turned and walked out, and his footsteps were steady in the corridor, and he did not look back at either the mirror or the man standing in front of it. He got back to the dormitory, sat on his bed, and wrote Tony the longest letter he had sent since September. He wrote for about an hour. About the mirror and what it had shown him, and Dumbledore and the stone and all of it, honest and clear without being sentimental, because Tony didn't need sentimentality and Harry wasn't wired for it, and what he was wired for was the truth told plainly. At the end he wrote, "I know what I'm walking into. I wanted you to know that I know." He sent it with Hedwig. He lay in the dark of the Gryffindor dormitory and listened to the castle breathe and thought about the mirror and the red-haired woman with his eyes, and then, deliberately, turned it down to a manageable volume and thought about what came next instead. The stone. The third floor. Quirrell. The timeline, he was fairly sure, was moving. The Gringotts petition came through the second week of December, 3 days before the Christmas break, and the contents of the sealed document box arrived in a packet that Pepper had sent through an overnight courier from New York, via a magical forwarding address she'd established through a law firm in Diagon Alley that Gringotts had recommended with the professional enthusiasm of an institution that took unsealing improper seals very personally. The packet contained 3 things. First, a full accounting of the Potter estate, including investments, properties, and a secondary vault that hadn't been in the original Gringotts records. The secondary vault was considerably larger than the first. It had been drawing interest for 10 years without the knowledge of its owner. Second, a letter from James Potter, written in the summer before Harry was born, addressed to Sirius Black and marked in the event that both Lily and I. It was a personal letter. Harry read it once alone and put it away. Third, a legal document signed by both James and Lily Potter, naming their intended guardians for Harry in the event of their deaths. The named guardian was not Petunia Dursley. The named guardian was Sirius Black, who was, and this was a 4th piece of information contained in the cover letter from the Gringotts legal office, currently incarcerated in Azkaban, the wizarding prison, convicted in 1980 one of the murder of Peter Pettigrew and 12 muggles, without trial. Harry read that last part twice. He sat with the packet on his bed in the Gryffindor dormitory and read without trial again, and then he looked at the wall for a moment, and then he got up and went to find Hermione. She was in the library because she was always in the library. He put the document in front of her. She read it, her jaw set. She read it again. "Without a trial," she said. "That's what it says. In Britain, in 1981, a man was sentenced to a life term in a maximum security prison without a trial." Her voice was precise and controlled. "That's not legal," Harry said. "Number, does your dad know? I'm sending the letter tonight." She slid the document back to him and looked at the middle distance in the way she did when she was organizing. "The Potter estate," she said. "The secondary vault, the sealed documents. Someone sealed those deliberately to prevent Harry Potter from knowing what he was owed." "Yes, and Sirius Black in Azkaban means the designated guardian couldn't come for me." Harry looked at the document. "Yeah." Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then, "How are you?" "Working on it," he said honestly. She nodded. She didn't push it. She turned back to her books, but slid one hand across the table and rested it briefly on the back of his, a quick and entirely unsentimental gesture, and then pulled it back and kept reading, and Harry sat across from her in the library and felt, with a solidity that was itself a kind of answer, that he was not doing any of this alone. He wrote to Tony that night. The longest letter yet. At the end of it he wrote, "I'm not angry. I mean, I am. But it's the useful kind of angry, the kind that makes you want to know everything and do something with what you know. You'd recognize it. I think I get it from you." He sent it. Then he wrote a second letter, which took considerably longer because he didn't have an address and had to route it through the Gringotts legal office. He wrote it carefully, choosing every word with precision, because the person he was writing to had been in a place for 10 years that Harry couldn't imagine, and he wanted to say the right things. He addressed it to Sirius Black Azkaban. He started it. "My name is Harry Potter. I have your documents. I know what was supposed to happen. I'm working on it." He sent it with Hedwig, who regarded the unusual routing instructions with the dignified capability of an owl who had handled Stranger. Harry watched her go from the owlery window into the December dark over the Scottish mountains. Below him, in the third-floor corridor, whatever was guarding the Philosopher's Stone was presumably still guarding it. In his chest, something he'd been sitting with since December's first gray morning settled into the particular alignment of a problem that had finally been fully scoped. He knew the board. He knew most of the pieces. He knew the endgame that Dumbledore had been constructing since before he could walk, the loving, patient, terrifying chess game of it. He went back to the common room. Ron was teaching Hermione Exploding Snap, which she was losing badly but refusing to acknowledge, and the fire was going, and the Christmas decorations were up, trees in every corner, tinsel doing things with physics that Tony would have found professionally interesting. And Harry sat down in the chair beside the fire and opened his charms notes and let the noise of the room settle around him like something that was his. It was. He'd made it his. That was the part he was still, privately, a little stunned by, that things could become yours through the simple and radical act of being somewhere long enough with the right people. His wand was in his pocket. The Marauder carry case was under his bed. Friday Jr. was quiet in his earpiece, the ambient comfort of her presence a steady low frequency. "You know," she said, "you've been working for 3 hours and you haven't eaten anything. I'm not hungry. That's not what your blood sugar says." Friday Jr. "Yes, you're worse than Pepper. I'll tell her you said that. Don't. I already did." He laughed, quiet enough not to disturb the room, and went to get food. Chapter 5. What we build the Christmas break emptied Hogwarts down to a skeleton, a handful of students, a reduced staff, and the castle itself, which seemed to settle differently when the noise left, like a large animal lying down. Harry stayed. He'd thought about going back to New York, had written to Tony about it, and Tony had written back immediately saying, "Come home. The workshop misses you. I may have started 3 new projects that need a second opinion." But Harry had looked at the third-floor corridor and the mirror of Arist and the calendar, and he'd stayed. Ron stayed, too, because the Weasley family was doing something complicated involving relatives in Romania. And he and Harry spent the first 4 days of the break doing something that looked like nothing. Exploding Snap, badly played chess that Harry kept losing because he approached it like an engineering problem, when Ron approached it like a war long meals in the nearly empty Great Hall where their voices echoed. But was actually, Harry recognized, the particular work of a friendship establishing itself at depth. The kind of depth that didn't come from dramatic moments, but from the accumulated weight of ordinary ones. Hermione had gone home to her parents, but she'd left Harry with a stack of books and a list of things to look up, which was her equivalent of a warm farewell. Tony sent a package on Christmas morning. It arrived by overnight courier through the Hogsmeade post, transfigured into a form that could be carried by owls in stages, which Pepper had apparently organized, and which Friday had apparently assisted with, and which Tony had apparently been informed about after the fact with the resigned acceptance of a man who understood that logistics were not his department. Inside was a new notebook, good paper, the kind Harry had mentioned once and Tony had remembered, and a component he didn't immediately recognize until Friday Jr. said quietly, "It's for the suit. He's been working on an upgrade since November," and Harry turned it over in his hands and found Tony's handwriting on a folded note inside. Mark II iteration. Improved calibration on the focusing arrays. I ran the November data and found 3 inefficiencies in the crystal lattice structure. Should increase spell precision by 30% without affecting power output. I also built in a secondary compartment for potions storage because Pepper told me about the school nurse's philosophy and I disagree with it philosophically. Happy Christmas. Don't do anything I wouldn't do, which leaves considerable room. TPS, the serious black situation is being handled. Richards has a contact in the ICWC. Don't move on it until I tell you the legal ground is solid. PPS, I made your room bigger. You'll see. Harry sat with the note for a moment. Ron, from across the dormitory, said, "Good present?" "Yeah," Harry said. He folded the note and put it in the notebook. "Yeah, it's good." He went to the 3rd floor on the 27th of December at 2 in the morning. Not because the timeline had forced him. Not because something had gone wrong. He went because he needed to know what was there, and because standing outside a problem was, in his considered experience, less useful than standing inside it with full information. He'd told Friday Jr. And she'd said, logging everything. "Your vitals are being monitored. I'm flagging Tony if anything looks wrong," in the practical tone she used when she decided not to argue with a decision and was hedging the risk instead. He didn't wear the full suit. He wore the gauntlets under his sleeves, and his wand was in his pocket, and he moved through the castle the way he'd learned to move through it in 3 months of early morning exploration, along the routes that the castle itself seemed to prefer, through the passages that opened more readily than others, with the particular quality of attention that Hogwarts rewarded if you paid it. The locked door on the 3rd floor opened to a simple unlocking charm, which told him it wasn't meant to be a real barrier. The real barriers were what waited beyond it. A large, 3-headed dog occupied the first room with the complete commitment of something that had been bred for a single purpose. It was sleeping. Harry looked at it from the doorway, noting the harp in the corner, an enchanted instrument, stone still and silent now, which meant someone had already been here, had already used it, and had been through the trapdoor in the floor before the music stopped and the dog woke. Someone was already inside. Harry dropped through the trapdoor. The devil's snare was easy. Lumos solemn through the left gauntlet array, full solar spectrum output. The plant recoiling immediately with the speed of something that understood light as an existential argument it wasn't going to win. He moved through it before it recovered and kept going. The winged keys were a problem he solved in about 40 seconds by flying, not on a broom, which would have been slower and required chasing, but vertically with the suit's propulsion, holding position at the lock while Friday Jr. identified the correct key by wing damage pattern, and he snatched it from the swarm on the first pass. He heard wings beating against the marauder in irritated protest and ignored them. The chess room was enormous, the black and white pieces standing in their positions with the patient readiness of something that had been waiting for this exact moment for months. A board already disrupted, white pieces in wrong positions, a path of captured black pieces suggesting someone had already played through here recently and the board had reset. He looked at the board. "Friday," he said. "Can you—" "Already running it," she said. "It's solvable, 11 moves." "Show me." She overlaid the solution on his visor in amber. Harry looked at it, then at the pieces, and then at the board as a whole system, and he saw what she saw and also what she hadn't said. That the solution required sacrificing the knight, which was positioned at H5, and that the intended solution, the one built into the challenge, required the player to sacrifice themselves. "The intended play is designed for a human player," he said. "Yes, they were supposed to get on the piece." He stopped. "That's the test. The test is whether someone will sacrifice themselves." He didn't get on the knight. He walked to the edge of the board, activated the right gauntlet at minimum power, and systematically moved the white pieces using precisely calibrated repulsor touches. Not cheating, because cheating implied a rule against it that hadn't been stated, just engineering, in a modified solution that Friday had produced in the 3 seconds while he was looking at the board, which achieved checkmate in 9 moves without sacrificing anything. The Black King tipped. The doors opened. The troll room had a troll already unconscious, which answered the question of whether someone had come through before him. The potion room had the logic puzzle, 7 bottles, a note, the riddle of which was safe forward, which was safe back. He read it once, identified the answer, drank the smallest bottle of the correct compound, and went through the black fire. On the other side was a room with a mirror in it, the mirror of Arist, and Professor Quirrell, standing before it with his back to the door and his hands clasped, his head tilted at an angle that was not quite natural, like a person listening to a voice in a room where Harry could only hear one side of the conversation. Harry came through the black flame and stood in the room and said nothing. He looked at the mirror. He looked at Quirrell. He looked at the room's dimensions, no other exits, a ceiling 20 feet up, stone floor, the mirror positioned centrally. He was running the tactical layout in 4 seconds while he kept his face completely neutral. "I thought it might be you," Quirrell said, without turning. His voice was different here, no stutter. Clear and precise, a voice that had been performing something it wasn't for an entire academic year, and had now set the performance down. The suit's sensors must have picked up, well, many things. "They did," Harry said. "I expected you much earlier, actually." Quirrell turned. His face was calm, a professor's face wearing its real expression for the first time, which was not malice. Harry noticed this specifically, but a kind of pressured conviction, the expression of someone who had been doing something they knew was wrong for long enough that they'd found a framework in which it was necessary. "Dumbledore thought you'd go for the stone before the holidays." "Dumbledore expected me to go for the stone," Harry said. "I went looking at it, there's a difference." "Semantic. Not really." Harry took a step into the room. The mirror's reflective surface caught him, showed him something briefly before he looked away from it deliberately. "What are you looking for in the mirror?" Quirrell's jaw tightened. "That is not. It's relevant," Harry said, "because you're not using it correctly. The stone only appears to someone who wants to find it, not use it. You've been wanting to use it, which is why you haven't found it." Quirrell stared at him. "How do you know Dumbledore designed the puzzle? I read his published papers on desire-reflective enchantments from 1964. The finding condition is built into the charm architecture." Harry paused. "Who told you it would just appear?" A silence. Something shifted in Quirrell's expression, a brief fracture in the surface that revealed something underneath it, uncertainty, and behind that, fear, and behind that, the specific terror of a person who has placed themselves in service of something that doesn't care about them. "I did," said a second voice. It came from everywhere and nowhere, and the room's temperature dropped 3 degrees in the second it spoke, which Friday Jr. logged and flagged, and Harry felt not as something supernatural, but as something that was trying to be, the cold, calculated voice of something that had been intelligence and power and had lost its body but had not. He registered this immediately, lost its capacity for strategy. "Harry Potter," the voice said. "At last, you are taller than I expected." "I'm 11, Harry said. "Give it time." "Take off the helmet," the voice said. "I would see your face. I can hear you fine from here." Harry kept his hands loose at his sides, the gauntlets ready, running the room again. Quirrell was the immediate physical problem. The voice was behind him somewhere. The mirror was between him and the only exit. "Where are you?" Quirrell reached up and began to unwrap his turban. Harry watched this and had just enough time to think of course before the back of Quirrell's head resolved itself into a face, gray, flat-featured, red-eyed, the face of something that was persisting beyond the point where persisting was natural, with the fierce, terrible will of a thing that had decided the rules of death did not apply to it. "Lord Voldemort," Harry said. "You say the name," the face on the back of Quirrell's head said, and the voice was slightly different from this angle, more textured, more itself. "Most do not. It's a name. It is more than that. Only if you let it be." Harry looked at the face with the same attention he gave engineering problems, directly, without the flinching away that the design of it was meant to produce. "You want the stone. You think it will restore you." "I know it will restore me," Voldemort said. "And I know you will not stop it. You are 11 years old, and you are alone in a room with my servant, and whatever your father has built you is impressive, but it is not enough. Here's the thing," Harry said, "about my father's engineering." He turned his left wrist over and activated the gauntlet array fully, the gold light of the focusing arrays blooming in the dim room. the reactor in his chest responding with the particular resonant hum of arc power and magic running in the same channel. Amplified, the combined output of two systems that had no business being compatible and were, emphatically, unambiguously, exactly that. He builds for the hardest possible case. Always. It's the first principle. The light intensified. He spent 6 weeks on this suit specifically because the world I was walking into was the kind of world where I'd end up in a room like this. Quirrell moved. It was fast. A wand draw and a wordless curse aimed at Harry's chest, dark purple, the color of something that didn't want to be seen. Harry moved with it, the suit's combat assist doing what 6 weeks of calibration had prepared it to do. And the curse broke against the chest plate with a flash, and the particular sound of a significant amount of magical energy making contact with a surface that had been specifically designed for it, and finding, with what was almost comical bad luck, that it had nowhere to go. Harry raised his right gauntlet. He put Quirrell on the floor with a repulsor blast calibrated to contained, enough to take the man off his feet, not enough for anything worse, and this calibration was not kindness. It was precision, because Quirrell was a person who had been used by something terrible, and Harry was not going to make irreversible decisions in haste. Quirrell hit the wall. The room went quiet. The face on the back of his head was still visible from this angle, still present, red-eyed, watching Harry with an expression that was recalibrating in real time. That, Voldemort said, was better than expected. I know. Harry walked to the mirror. He stood before it and looked, deliberately and directly, at what it showed him, not the longed-for image from December, because he was standing here with intent and the mirror read intent, and what it showed him now was his own hands, and in his hands the stone. He reached forward. His fingers touched the mirror's surface. The stone appeared in his palm, just like that, cold, smooth, small for what it was, a dark red that caught the light of his gauntlet array and threw it back amber. He closed his hand around it. "Give it to me," Voldemort said, and the voice was enormous and cold and designed to fill every available space in the room. "Give it to me and I will give you what you want most. I have seen what you want, Harry Potter. I have looked in that mirror. Your parents—" "My parents are dead," Harry said. He didn't say it harshly. He said it the way you said a fact you had made peace with, not gladly, not with the pretense that it didn't hurt, but with the steadiness of someone who had held it long enough to know its exact dimensions. "The stone won't bring them back. You know that. You don't even want the same thing the mirror showed me." He looked at the face on the back of Quirrell's head. "What did it show you?" A silence. "A body," Voldemort said, and the flat honesty of it was unexpected. A creature stripped down by desperation to something that would tell the truth because strategy had failed. "My own body, flesh, a hand, the ability to—" He stopped. "You cannot understand." "I understand wanting things you can't have," Harry said. "I understand making yourself smaller to avoid punishment. I understand being treated like you don't matter." He looked at the face steadily. "But I don't understand deciding that the answer is to hurt everyone else until the wanting stops." "You are 11, Voldemort said, and now the voice was cold again, the brief honesty sealed back over. "You know nothing of what I have endured, what I have sacrificed. I will not be stopped by a child with his father's toys. They're not toys." Harry closed the stone in his fist. The gauntlet blazed, the arc reactor and his magic responding to his intent with the combined force of something that had been built specifically for exactly this, and he brought both hands together, the full focusing array of both gauntlets active, and said very calmly, "You're not getting the stone. You're not getting a new body tonight. What you're getting is the end of this particular plan." He paused. "Go find a new one if you want. I'll be here." He pointed both gauntlets at Quirrell, not at Voldemort, at Quirrell. "You can leave him," Harry said to the face. "Whatever you are right now, whatever you're possessing him with, you can leave, and he might actually survive this. You have no understanding of what—" "I have complete understanding," Harry said. "You need a host, you need the stone, you need a series of things I'm in a position to prevent. What you don't need is me pointing full output arc magic integration at your current vessel while we have this conversation." He kept his voice level. I'm not giving you options because I'm afraid of you. I'm giving you options because I am not interested in being the reason someone dies in a dungeon in Scotland." A silence that stretched. Then Quirrell's body arched, and the scream it produced was not Quirrell's, and the gray face on the back of his skull went through a series of expressions, rage, calculation, and then something that was almost recognition, the look of something encountering a version of events it hadn't modeled and dispersed. Not destroyed. Harry knew that. It was too diffuse, too deliberately non-corporeal to be destroyed by a direct strike. It would need something more specific for that, and he didn't have it, and he filed this away as information rather than failure. Quirrell collapsed. Harry crossed to him, crouched down, checked his pulse. Alive, breathing. The face on the back of his head was gone, just the back of a man's head now, pale and sweating and unconscious. Harry looked at him for a moment, then straightened and held the stone in his closed hand and said, "Friday." "Yeah, get me Dumbledore." "Already on it. McGonagall's been alerted." Also a brief pause. "Harry." "Yeah, your dad's in the air." Harry stopped. "What?" "He's been in the air for 2 hours." Friday Jr.'s voice carried something that was as close to affection as a precisely calibrated AI could construct. "He flagged the troll room as a conflict event 3 hours ago, and he's been in the air since. He couldn't tell you without potentially alerting anyone monitoring the comms. She paused. "He said to tell you, and I'm quoting, 'I know you've got it handled. I'm coming anyway.'" Harry stood in the chamber beneath Hogwarts with the Philosopher's Stone in his fist and an unconscious man at his feet, and the fading resonance of something ancient and terrible recently departed, and felt something move through him that he didn't immediately have a word for. It wasn't relief. Relief was what happened when you'd been afraid, and the thing you were afraid of hadn't happened. This was different. This was the feeling of a net that you hadn't known you were trusting until you found it holding. "Tell him," Harry said, "that I've got it. Tell him I'm fine. Tell him," he paused. "Tell him the suit worked." "He'll know that," Friday Jr. said. "He can see your vitals from the plane." "Tell him anyway." The walk back through the chambers was faster going up. The chess pieces were still in their endgame positions. The winged keys were circling in subdued patterns. The devil's snare had retreated from the light sources and was sulking against the walls. Harry moved through all of it with the steady, unhurried pace of someone who had done what they'd come to do and was ready to go home. He came up through the trapdoor, through the sleeping dog's room. The harp had started playing again, the enchantment reactivating, and through the locked door and into the third-floor corridor where Dumbledore was waiting. The headmaster was alone. He looked at Harry, at the suit, at the stone visible in Harry's open hand, at whatever his face was doing, and was silent for a moment. "Is Quirrell," he started. "Alive. He needs the hospital wing. Voldemort was using him as a host." "It's gone now, dispersed, not destroyed. You should know that." Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly, opened them. "The stone!" Harry held it out. Dumbledore took it and stood with it in his palm and looked at it, and something in his face moved that was not about the stone at all. "You went in without telling me," he said. "You designed it to be gone into without telling you." Harry wasn't accusatory. Tired, maybe, in the specific way of someone who had expected a confrontation to be harder and found it was just sad. "You built a pathway you expected me to walk. I walked it on my own terms and at a time of my own choosing." "That's the difference." Dumbledore was quiet. "I found the stone because I wanted to protect it," Harry said. "Not because I wanted to use it. That's the distinction you built into the mirror charm. I know why you put it in there." He paused. "You wanted to know if I was the right kind of person." "I wanted to know if you were ready," Dumbledore said. His voice was quieter than Harry had ever heard it. "I know." Harry looked at him steadily. "I have a question." "Yes. The prophecy." He watched Dumbledore's face. "There is one, something about me and Voldemort. I've been working around the edges of it for months. The way you positioned the stone, the way you set up the protections as a test rather than an actual barrier, the way the whole year has the shape of a preparation." He paused. "I want to know what it says." A long silence. The corridor was cold and still. Somewhere below them, the three-headed dog shifted in its sleep. "That," Dumbledore said carefully, "is a conversation for now," Harry said. "I know what it feels like to have information kept from me for my own good, Professor. I know the shape of it and the weight of it and what it costs." He met the old man's eyes. "I'm asking you to do it differently. You don't have to tell me everything tonight, but I am asking you to commit right now to telling me the truth as we go, not after the fact. Not when it's necessary, as we go." Dumbledore looked at him for a very long time. "You are," he said finally, "more like your mother than you know. She also refused to be managed." A pause, weighted with decades. "Very well, Harry, as we go." It wasn't a full accounting. Harry knew that. It was a beginning of one which was different and which was, given the man he was dealing with, something close to the best achievable outcome right now. He filed it accordingly. He nodded. "Send someone for Quirrell." He walked down the corridor. The hospital wing at 3 in the morning was quiet in the way of places designed for recovery. Dim, warm, smelling of potions and clean linen. Madame Pomfrey had taken one look at Harry, declared him physically uninjured, produced a calming draft he declined, and then left him alone, which was exactly what he wanted. He sat on a bed near the window and looked at the grounds in the dark. Snow had come down while he was below the castle, an inch of it, maybe, covering the lawns in a clean, even layer that made the world outside look simplified. He could see the Quidditch pitch and the forest and the far lights of Hogsmeade through the window, small and steady. Friday Jr. said very quietly, 20 minutes. Until Tony lands. A pause. "He's going to try not to make it a big thing." "He'll make it a big thing." "A little bit," she agreed. Harry almost laughed. He looked out at the snow. The door to the hospital wing opened at 3:47, and Tony Stark walked in wearing a jacket that was too light for the Scottish winter, and the particular expression of a man who had spent 2 hours on a private jet practicing being calm and had mostly succeeded. He looked at Harry, on the bed, fully present and uninjured, and holding a cup of hospital wing tea that Madame Pomfrey had left. He stopped. "Hey," Harry said. "Hey!" Tony came across the ward, looked him over with the quick, systematic visual assessment of an engineer checking for damage, found none, and sat in the chair beside the bed. He did it without drama and without the explosion of reaction that Harry had halfway expected and also somewhat dreaded. He just sat down. They were quiet for a moment. "The suit worked," Tony said. "Friday told you I said that." "She did. I want to hear it from you." "The suit worked," Harry said. "The calibration on the gauntlet arrays the precision increase was real. 30% is an undercount, actually. I had more control in there than I've had in any test environment." "Good," Tony leaned back in the chair. "The combat assist. Exactly what it needed to be. Quirrell was fast. I wasn't thinking about the mechanics, I was thinking about the situation. That's what it's for." Tony was quiet for a moment. "Voldemort. Dispersed, not gone." "I know." A pause. "The stone. Dumbledore has it." Harry looked at his hands. "He's going to destroy it. I told him what you found out from Richards about what it does to the soul over time. He already knew, I think, but he needed someone to say it plainly." Tony nodded. He looked at the window, at the snow on the grounds, and then back at Harry. "You went in without telling me." "You were in the air within an hour of the first alert," Harry said. "You were monitoring my vitals. You had Friday Jr., logging everything. What would telling you have changed?" "I would have known in advance. You would have wanted to come in with me." "Yes. And that would have changed the dynamic with Quirrell and Voldemort." Harry met Tony's eyes. "You're not a wizard. In there, that mattered. I needed to be the one who walked in because the challenge was built around me walking in and changing the dynamic would have." "I know," Tony said. "I know." He ran a hand over his face, the gesture that meant he'd argued with himself about this for 2 hours and hadn't won. "I know you're right. He stopped. "Still what?" A pause. The kind that came before things Tony didn't usually say, the ones that sat longer in the waiting room of his expression before they were cleared for departure. "I still don't like it," he said. "You being in danger, I don't like it." "I know," Harry said. "I built you the best suit I've ever built. I built you an AI. I put 6 weeks of everything I had into the engineering specifically because the world you were going into had real stakes, and I still—" He stopped again. "I looked at the vitals on the plane and everything was fine. You were fine. Every reading was nominal, and it's still—" "Tony." "Yeah, I know," Harry said for the third time. He said it differently this time, not as acknowledgement but as answer. The words were doing more than one job. He looked at Tony in the dim hospital wing light and said very plainly, "I know." Tony looked at him. Something in his face did a thing that it didn't usually do in the space of about 2 seconds, and then he cleared it and it was just his face again. "Okay," he said. "Okay," Harry said. Outside, the snow was coming down again. Harry could see it in the window, soft, steady, the particular silence of heavy weather over quiet ground. "The serious black situation," Harry said. "Richard's moving. I've got a contact at the ICWC, and Pepper's been talking to someone at the British Ministry, who is apparently very aware that a procedurally botched incarceration is a liability they'd prefer to address quietly." Tony's voice shifted back into its professional register, the one he used when he was handling something that had made him angry by making it into a problem he could solve. "We're going to get him a trial. Properly. Whatever the outcome, it'll be done correctly this time." Harry nodded. He'd thought about Sirius Black every few days since the Gringotts letter, not obsessively, not in the way that stopped him from functioning, but with the steady low-frequency attention he gave to things that weren't resolved yet. He hadn't heard back from the letter he'd sent to Azkaban. He'd wondered sometimes what a man in that place did with a letter. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me for doing the right thing. It's a bad precedent." Tony stood, stretched, looked around the hospital wing with the expression of a man who had been in uncomfortable chairs on planes for 2 hours, and found the hospital wing chair an improvement. "Madame Pomfrey keeping you overnight," she said until morning for observation. "I'll stay." Tony sat back down. "You don't have to. I'm aware." He picked up the chair and moved it slightly, finding a better angle. "I also just flew 6 hours to a castle in Scotland, so I think I'll make an evening of it. What have you got to read?" Harry reached into the bag by the bed and produced Advanced Theory of Magical Resonance, a cross-disciplinary study, which was a book he'd found in the restricted section by asking Flitwick for a permissions slip with a sufficiently detailed academic rationale, and which he'd been working through for 2 weeks. Tony took it, read the cover, turned to the index. "Chapter 12, he said. "That's the one on, oh, that's interesting." He turned to Chapter 12. They read in the quiet of the hospital wing while the snow came down outside, and the candles burned low, and somewhere in the castle 1,100 students slept through the end of the first year that had changed the shape of things. The morning came gray and bright simultaneously, the way mornings after snowfall always did. The world simplified and clarified, everything covered in the same careful white. Harry ate the breakfast Madame Pomfrey produced, submitted to a final checkup, and was released into the castle. Tony walked with him through the corridors. They passed other students going to breakfast, some staring, some who had clearly already heard some version of last night's events, the story moving through the school's population in the way information moved through any closed system, which was quickly and with significant embellishment. Harry heard someone say he fought you-know-who, and someone else say the suit broke through 6 enchantments, and someone else say something about the stone that was almost entirely wrong, but had an interesting kernel of something real in the center of it. He didn't correct any of them. He kept walking. Hermione was in the entrance hall with her parents' car keys in her hand, returned early from her Christmas break, which meant she'd gotten his letter and had come back. She took one look at him and said, "You went in." And Harry said, "Yeah." And she said, "I'm going to be furious with you later, and right now I'm just glad you're standing there." With such precise economy of feeling that Tony, walking beside Harry, said, "I like her," at approximately normal volume. Hermione looked at Tony Stark standing in the Hogwarts entrance hall in a jacket that was too light for December in Scotland and said, with the particular composure of someone who had been told exactly who he was but was still encountering the reality of him, "Mr. Stark. Miss Granger." He extended a hand. She shook it. Harry says you're the sharpest person at this school. He's the second sharpest, she said, without missing a beat. I thought you should know. Tony looked at Harry. I like her a lot. Ron appeared from the direction of the Great Hall with a piece of toast in one hand and said, "Oh good, you're alive," I thought, and then registered Tony, and did the celebrity recognition face that he'd apparently decided he was too mature for at 11 and did anyway. You're actually Ron Weasley," Tony said. "Harry mentioned you, said you think like a strategist." Ron stood slightly straighter. Did he? Said you beat him at chess consistently. 13 times now, Ron said, with the solemn pride of a man who had achieved something real. He's terrible at chess. He thinks it's an optimization problem. It's not, Tony agreed. It's a war. Thank you, Ron said, looking at Harry. Harry looked between them and felt with quiet completeness that something was exactly right, not perfectly right, because the world was complicated and Sirius Black was in Azkaban and Voldemort was somewhere without a body but not without intent, and Dumbledore was a man he would have to keep watching with careful attention, and there were 4 more years of Hogwarts and whatever came after. Not perfectly right, but oriented correctly, pointed in a direction he had chosen, equipped with what he needed, and surrounded by people who were there because they wanted to be. The entrance hall of Hogwarts was cold and vast and decorated for a holiday that was almost over. Tony was saying something to Ron about chess openings with the energy of a man who had been awake for 24 hours and had no intention of slowing down. Hermione had already produced a notebook and was writing something down. Theory, probably, triggered by something she'd read on the drive back, with the focused intensity of someone for whom no setting was fully off. Friday, Harry said quietly while the others talked. Yeah, she said. Log it. Log what? He looked at the entrance hall, at the people in it, at the snow through the high windows and the castle above them and the year's end settling into something he could carry forward. This, he said. Just log this one. A brief pause. Done, Friday Jr., said, soft and warm and exactly calibrated. He walked across the entrance hall to where his family was.